Feigning prophetic madness is one of the most unsettling yet cunning psychological tactics used in ancient times to bypass authority, provoke awe, and manipulate without punishment. At its heart, it is the deliberate performance of divine madness, acting as if possessed by gods, spirits, or cosmic forces, so that one's words, however outrageous, are not only tolerated, but revered. When someone appeared touched by the divine or teetering on the edge of sanity, ancient societies often stopped questioning them. Madness, after all, was sacred, it was feared, and when it wore a spiritual mask, it became untouchable. Feigning prophetic madness. This tactic was especially potent in civilizations where divine signs governed life and oracles held more sway than kings. Pretending to be overtaken by divine visions allowed one to voice otherwise forbidden truths. A person might speak heresy or insult royalty, but because they were not in their right mind, they were spared, yet everyone still listened. Why? Because the mad prophet was believed to channel something greater, something terrifying, something true. There is something deeply primal about this. Watching someone in prophetic madness is like peering into the unknown. It disarms the rational brain. People feel both awe and dread. That fear, that uncertainty, creates the perfect environment for manipulation. Kings consulted madmen. Crowds gathered around them. Enemies hesitated to strike. By appearing broken by the divine, manipulators removed themselves from the hierarchy, gaining the freedom to say anything, while planting dangerous seeds in the minds of those too spellbound to look away. What was madness, after all, but misunderstood power in disguise? Oracle Redirection. Oracle Redirection is an ancient but chillingly effective tactic that reveals just how easily faith can be bought and destiny rewritten. At its core, this manipulation involved bribing oracles, those sacred intermediaries between gods and mortals, to bend divine prophecy in favor of the highest bidder. In civilizations like Greece, where oracles were considered the mouthpieces of deities, their words shaped wars, marriages, coronations, and conquests. But behind the veil of mysticism was a raw, transactional reality. Those who paid ruled fate. A powerful leader might approach an oracle not seeking guidance, but control. With enough gold or political pressure, the oracle would frame ambiguous signs, a storm, a birthmark, a dream, as divine endorsements. A king could justify slaughter, a general could start war, all cloaked in the false certainty of celestial approval. And the masses, hungry for meaning and chaos, believed every word. They didn't see bribery, they saw destiny. What makes oracle redirection so dangerous isn't just the manipulation of one person, it's the manipulation of belief itself. When the divine can be bought, morality crumbles. Empires rise on lies whispered in sacred temples. People kill, sacrifice, and suffer in the name of falsified fate. And the manipulators? They never need to lift a blade. Their weapon is belief, twisted at its root. It is a brutal reminder of how the most revered voices can be corrupted. When divine authority is compromised, truth becomes theater, and the crowd becomes a tool. In the end, it wasn't the gods who spoke. It was the one who could afford to make them whisper. False omens. False omens are among the most haunting tools of manipulation because they prey not on logic, but on fear. In a world where the sky, the flight of birds, or the sudden death of an animal were interpreted as divine messages, controlling those signs meant controlling the minds of thousands. This tactic involved deliberately fabricating supernatural signs to provoke panic, loyalty, or submission. It was psychological warfare cloaked in superstition, and it worked terrifyingly well. An ambitious priest might scatter ashes across the temple steps to simulate divine wrath. A ruler could release trained birds to fly in a certain pattern before a speech, proving the gods' approval. A dead animal left at a city gate, arranged just right, would stir whispers of plague or war. These weren't random acts, they were staged performances designed to hijack belief and force collective action. What makes this tactic so powerful is its use of the subconscious. When people already believe the universe is speaking through signs, all it takes is one planted omen to shift the course of an entire city. Faith turns to fear, doubt turns to obedience. No sword is needed, just a well-placed sign and the illusion of divine timing. Leaders and priests use false omens to suppress rebellion, justify executions, or crown unworthy heirs. The public, desperate to avoid divine punishment, obeyed without resistance. It's emotional blackmail on a cosmic scale, fooling people not just into believing a lie, but into building their entire reality around it. In the end, nothing enslaves the human mind more completely than the fear that the gods are watching and disapproving. Strategic silence. Strategic silence is a manipulation tactic as old as power itself, where influence is wielded not through what is said, but through what is withheld. In ancient courts and temples, among warriors and sages, those who remained silent at crucial moments radiated an eerie power. While others scrambled for answers, the silent one became a mystery, and in that mystery, people projected their fears, their hopes, their doubts. Silence became a blank canvas onto which others painted meaning. This was never the silence of ignorance. It was a deliberate choice, a high priest refusing to interpret an omen, a general not answering a challenge, a ruler listening to accusations without a word. The absence of response triggered unease. People asked, "What does he know? What is she hiding? Is this judgment, approval, rage?" The longer the silence lingered, the more its weight grew. It became suffocating. The beauty and the terror of strategic silence lies in the human brain's need for closure. In the void of words, the mind creates stories. The manipulator doesn't have to lie. They simply have to remain silent long enough for others to deceive themselves. It builds tension. It demands respect. It generates fear. In negotiations, it causes the other side to speak too much. In conflict, it breeds paranoia. In leadership, it amplifies authority. People fear what they cannot read, and the silent figure becomes untouchable, unreadable, godlike. Ancient mystics used silence to appear divinely detached. Tyrants used it to keep enemies guessing. Silence, when used strategically, isn't absence, it's domination by stillness. Divine possession claims. Claiming divine possession is one of the most spine-chilling manipulation tactics ever used because it demands obedience, not through force, but through sacred fear. In ancient times, when gods were believed to walk among mortals, to speak through flesh and ride the breath of chosen vessels, a single person could become untouchable simply by saying, "The God is within me." And when that happened, their voice was no longer theirs, it became the command of heaven. The tactic was disturbingly effective. A trembling priestess, eyes rolled back, speaking in riddles, a blood-soaked warrior howling in battle, claiming the war god surged through his veins, a ruler declaring that their judgment wasn't political, but divine will. These weren't seen as theatrics. People fell to their knees. They wept. They obeyed, because to question someone possessed by a god was to question the god itself, and that, to the ancient mind, was blasphemy. But the manipulation was razor sharp. Behind the shaking hands and sacred spasms was often a cold, calculating mind. Leaders faked possession to silence dissent. Priests used it to control rituals and dictate politics. Even commoners sometimes invoked it to escape punishment or gain status. It transformed a mortal into a mouthpiece of the divine and stripped everyone else of the right to argue. The power of divine possession claims didn't come from truth. It came from terror, from awe, from the primal instinct that the gods are watching and they've chosen someone. And it isn't you. When a person declared, "I am filled with the God," what they really meant was, "You no longer have the right to question me." Sacrificial Diversion. Sacrificial diversion is a haunting manipulation tactic that twists sacred ritual into a shield against justice. At its core, it is the deliberate use of public sacrifice, not as devotion, but as distraction. When the walls were closing in, when guilt was rising or punishment looming, ancient leaders and priests turned to blood and fire, not to cleanse themselves, but to shift attention. They summoned the spectacle of sacrifice to manipulate fear, emotion, and the human need for meaning. Imagine this. A ruler stands accused of betrayal. Tensions boil in the streets, but before the people can demand answers, a sacred bull is marched into the temple. Drums thunder, chants rise, and the king proclaims that the gods require an offering. Suddenly, all eyes are on the ritual. The scent of burning flesh clouds the air. Fear of divine wrath silences protest, and judgment is forgotten. Sacrificial diversion feeds on the primal belief that human suffering can restore cosmic order. In ancient minds, a ritual could balance the scales, even if the wrong crime was atoned for. Manipulators used this to their advantage. They staged grand ceremonies at the height of political scandal. They offered innocent animals or even condemned criminals as living apologies to the gods, hoping the crowd would confuse blood for accountability. And it worked. Sacrifice triggered emotion. It felt holy. It looked like penance. But in reality, it was misdirection. While the people watched the flames and whispered prayers, the guilty slipped away untouched. The altar didn't demand justice. It buried it. Astrological Justification. Astrological justification is the ancient art of cloaking power plays in the language of the stars, using falsified star charts to validate decisions, manipulate outcomes, and silence dissent. In societies where the heavens were believed to mirror the will of the gods, astrology wasn't superstition, it was law. The movement of planets could decide life and death, war or peace, kingship or exile, and those who controlled the interpretation of the skies controlled the fate of empires. This tactic was terrifyingly elegant. A ruler about to seize land might consult their astrologer, not to learn the truth, but to commission a lie. A chart would be drawn, aligned just so, with Mars ascending and Jupiter in perfect favor, proving the conquest was divinely blessed. A rival's birth date could be manipulated to show a cursed alignment, branding them as doomed or untrustworthy. Star charts became weapons, tools of illusion crafted to end debate before it began. What made astrological justification so dangerous was how deeply people trusted it. The stars were silent, beautiful, unreachable. Who would dare question their wisdom? So when a decision came wrapped in celestial approval, it felt absolute. Resistance meant opposing the universe itself. Even skeptics hesitated. This tactic was used to crown unworthy kings, wage senseless wars, annul marriages, execute scapegoats, or stall reforms. And while the charts looked mathematical, the meanings were anything but. They were tailored narratives built to manipulate belief under the mask of objectivity. People saw destiny, but it was fabrication. They looked up at the sky, searching for truth, never realizing the stars had already been scripted. Monumental Messaging. Monumental messaging is the silent art of manipulation carved in stone, where power speaks not through words, but through towering symbols that loom over cities, generations, and the subconscious mind. In ancient civilizations, rulers didn't just build for function, they built to control. Temples, statues, gates, pyramids, these weren't just structures, they were statements. Every column, inscription, and godlike figure etched into them whispered a story. I am divine. I am eternal. I cannot be defied. This tactic preyed on awe. When someone stands before a monument 10 times their height, their mind shifts. They feel small. They feel watched. And if that monument bears the face of a ruler or the symbols of a dynasty, that power becomes something greater than human. it becomes godlike. Architecture turned ideology into reality. A ruler's lies became literal foundations. Their image was cast into stone not for beauty, but so people would believe it had always been true. Even placement mattered. A triumphal arch at a city's entrance reminded everyone, visitor or citizen, who controlled this land. A temple positioned to catch the rising sun gave the illusion that the gods themselves honored the ruler first each day. The manipulation was invisible but constant. People lived inside it, prayed beneath it, passed it to their children. Over time, these messages didn't need to be read, they were felt. A citizen didn't question authority because the city itself proved it. That is the horror of monumental messaging. When lies are carved deep enough into stone, people start calling them history. Ritualized exile. Ritualized exile is a cruel and calculated manipulation tactic that weaponizes public shame, fear, and ceremony to maintain control. It is not simply the act of banishing someone, it is the performance of their removal. In ancient times, exile wasn't just a punishment. It was a ritualized display meant to warn, to silence, and to remind the people who truly held power. It turned one person's destruction into a spectacle of obedience. Imagine the scene, a public square, the accused kneeling under heavy silence, surrounded by symbols of guilt, ashes, chains, animal blood. Priests chant, soldiers look on. The ruler's decree is read aloud, not as a statement, but as a divine judgment. And then the exile begins, not quietly, but as a grand procession of rejection. The crowd watches, some cheer, others weep, everyone learns. Ritualized exile is emotional warfare. It doesn't just remove a threat, it infects the hearts of the people with a chilling message. Step out of line, and this will be you. It makes an example of the victim, stripping them of home, identity, belonging, everything. But it does so under the guise of sacred order. It's not murder, it's justice. It's not cruelty, it's purification. This tactic was used to eliminate rivals, silence dissenters, or punish scapegoats without bloodshed. Because when someone is exiled through ritual, they are erased ritually, not just from the city, but from memory, from history. It is the illusion of righteousness masking raw dominance. The gods are invoked, the people are pacified, and the power remains exactly where it was, only stronger. Feigning religious revelation. Feigning religious revelation is one of the most deeply unsettling manipulation tactics in human history because it twists the sacred into a weapon and faith into a leash. At its core, it is the deliberate fabrication of divine visions, false encounters with gods, spirits, or cosmic truth, all crafted to control, deceive, and dominate. In a world where the divine shaped every aspect of life, from birth to war to death, claiming a message from the heavens gave a person terrifying power. Imagine someone standing before a trembling crowd, eyes wide, voice quaking, saying, "The gods have spoken to me." The atmosphere shifts, doubt dissolves. Whether they demand obedience, predict disaster, or name a chosen king, their words cut deeper than any sword because they aren't speaking as themselves anymore. They're speaking as the voice of the divine. The manipulation lies in how eagerly people want to believe. In times of fear, famine, or uncertainty, a divine message offers meaning. It soothes chaos. It makes the unbearable feel planned. And so the faker becomes a messiah, not because their vision is real, but because others need it to be. They cry, kneel, obey, and the manipulator smiles behind holy tears. Throughout history, charlatans have claimed to see angels, hear gods, or be shown sacred signs, all to sway hearts, win wars, or climb to power. The terrifying part is how effective it is, because when people believe a god has spoken, logic dies, fear kneels, freedom vanishes, and one person holds the strings of destiny, strings woven from a lie wrapped in holiness. Sacred text alteration. Sacred text alteration is one of the most insidious manipulation tactics in history because it doesn't just change a law or a policy, it rewrites the foundation of belief itself. At its core, this technique involves tampering with holy texts, those revered, untouchable words said to come from gods or divine messengers, and quietly inserting political propaganda into their pages. It is corruption disguised as revelation, and once done, it is nearly impossible to undo. Ancient rulers and high priests understood the terrifying power of Scripture. Sacred texts dictated right and wrong, life and death, heaven and hell. If the people believed the gods had spoken, then argument was heresy and resistance was suicide. So what better place to hide an agenda than within the very voice of divinity? A line is added here, obey the king, for he is chosen by the gods. Another there, the enemy to the east is cursed and must be destroyed. Over time, these edits blur into the sacred whole. No one remembers the original. Generations are born into lies carved in stone. They live by them, die by them, kill for them. This tactic wasn't loud. It was quiet, precise, and horrifyingly effective. The people believed they were following eternal truths, when in fact they were puppets of ancient propaganda. And the manipulators? They didn't need to rule by sword or fear. They ruled through belief, through faith, through the invisible ink of altered divinity. Because when the words of the gods are forged, reality itself bends, and no one ever thinks to question what was always true. Symbolic gesture warfare. Symbolic gesture warfare is the dark, poetic art of sending messages without words, gifts wrapped in silence, meant not to honor, but to unsettle. In ancient times, when direct threats were dangerous and war declarations carried weight, power often spoke in metaphor. A sword wrapped in silk, a dead animal laid at a threshold, a wreath of thorns sent to a rival's court. These were not just gifts, they were warnings. They were chess moves designed to strike the heart without drawing a drop of blood. This tactic weaponized ambiguity. If challenged, the sender could always claim innocence. It was just a gift, but everyone knew, everyone felt the intent behind the symbol. That was the brilliance of it. The fear didn't come from what was said. It came from what was not said. The uncertainty, the suggestion, the eerie elegance of the threat hidden inside a gesture. Rulers used it to intimidate neighbors without breaking treaties. Generals sent them before battle to rattle the enemy's morale. Even lovers and spies wielded symbolic gifts to manipulate emotion, loyalty, or dread. A cracked mirror, a wilted flower, a single arrow. These objects whispered what could not be spoken, and that whisper often screamed louder than words ever could. What makes symbolic gesture warfare so chilling is that it turns the ordinary into the ominous. It invades the mind and festers. The message keeps echoing long after the gift is unwrapped, and by the time the recipient understands what's really being said, the damage is already done. The fear has taken root. The silence has spoken. Ancestral embellishment. Ancestral embellishment is a manipulation tactic that turns lies into legacy and illusion into power. At its heart, it is the fabrication or convenient discovery of a noble, divine, or heroic bloodline to legitimize authority. In ancient societies where lineage defined worth, status, and the right to rule, who you descended from wasn't just history, it was destiny. And if your blood wasn't pure enough, you made it pure on paper, in legend, or in sacred song. Imagine a minor warlord claiming descent from a long-dead king, or a corrupt priest rewriting family scrolls to link himself to a saint. Stories are whispered into sacred texts. Genealogies are forged. A distant uncle is suddenly a fallen hero. A grandmother becomes a high-born daughter of gods. These lies are planted like seeds, and over time, they grow into untouchable truths. This tactic exploits a deep human need, the belief that greatness is inherited, that some people are simply meant to lead, that divine right flows through veins, and so the faker isn't questioned, they're worshipped. Their blood becomes a shield, a crown, a weapon. No one asks if it's real, because to question it is to unravel the entire myth of order. Ancestral embellishment doesn't just rewrite one person's story, it rewrites the future. Dynasties rise on invented glory, wars are justified by false heritage, whole peoples are enslaved or exiled by those who claim to be chosen through blood. But beneath the gold-threaded banners and ancient crests lies a single truth: it was all made up, a story told just convincingly enough to enslave the minds of millions who never thought to ask, what if our kings were never royal at all? Fabricated prophecies. Fabricated prophecies are among the most devious manipulations of ancient belief, a cruel merging of historical rewriting and spiritual deception. This tactic involves creating prophecies after events have already taken place, then presenting them as if they had been written long ago. It's the illusion of foresight, carefully crafted to awe the masses and legitimize those in power. When used effectively, it doesn't just rewrite history, it rewires belief. Picture a scroll discovered in a sacred chamber, its edges age, its ink faded just enough to look ancient. The words seem to predict the exact rise of a new ruler, the outcome of a war, or the fall of a city. The people read it wide-eyed and feel chills. The gods saw this coming. It was destined, but it wasn't. It was fabricated, quietly, strategically, often by scribes, loyal to the very person the prophecy glorifies. This tactic worked because people want to believe in patterns. In a world of chaos, prophecy offers structure. The moment someone believes their suffering, their victories, their rulers were foretold, they stop resisting. They see fate instead of manipulation, and that belief becomes a cage. Ancient emperors, priests, and revolutionaries all used this method to manufacture legitimacy. They forged scrolls, inscribed tablets, and buried ancient texts in temples only to miraculously uncover them when convenient. Each time, the effect was the same: awe, obedience, silence. What's terrifying is how subtle it is. A lie buried in the past reshapes the present, and when the divine is seen to have already spoken, there is nothing left to debate, only to obey. Divine bloodline claims. Divine bloodline claims are among the most audacious and psychologically potent forms of manipulation in human history. At their core lies one chilling idea: I am not like you. I am descended from the gods. In ancient cultures where the divine shaped every aspect of life, claiming godhood in your veins wasn't arrogance. It was the ultimate power move. It placed rulers above question, above law, even above morality. If their blood came from the heavens, then their actions, no matter how cruel, were sacred by default. This tactic didn't whisper, it roared. Pharaohs were sons of Ra. Emperors of Rome claimed lineage from Venus. Kings across Asia and Mesopotamia forged myths connecting their ancestors to the sun, the moon, and war gods. These weren't just bedtime stories, they were weapons. If a ruler's will clashed with the people's, it didn't matter. His divine blood made him right. His failures were divine tests. His triumphs were destiny fulfilled. His enemies? Blasphemers. And it worked. People knelt not just in fear, but in worship. Soldiers fought harder, citizens obeyed blindly, and rebellions died stillborn. Because how could you rise against the blood of heaven? To harm the ruler was to offend the cosmos itself. Every drop of his blood wasn't just royal, it was sacred currency. But behind the divine glow was always manipulation. Myths were constructed, lineages forged, stories repeated until they became law. This wasn't just lying, it was identity theft on a cosmic scale, and the people, desperate for order, for meaning, for something greater, believed it, not because it was true, but because they needed it to be. Ritual curses. Ritual curses are one of the most psychologically brutal forms of ancient manipulation, a weaponized ceremony that doesn't strike the body but the soul. In a time when fate was sacred and the gods were always watching, a public curse was more than an insult. It was a spiritual execution. By calling down divine wrath in a formal ritual, manipulators could destroy reputations, provoke fear, and isolate enemies without ever touching them. The process was theatrical, chilling, and calculated. A priest or sorcerer would stand before an altar, perhaps under the open sky, surrounded by symbols of power, burning incense, carved idols, animal bones. The enemy's name would be spoken, etched onto clay or lead, then buried, drowned, or set ablaze. The words would be fierce, poetic, full of venom. May their crops fail, may their children wither, may their soul be hunted in every realm. The crowd would watch in silence, and the victim, even if far away, would feel the noose tighten. The brilliance of the ritual curse wasn't just in the curse itself, it was in the spectacle. It wasn't whispered, it was declared, witnessed, believed, and that belief was the true poison. People avoided the cursed, allies withdrew, friends turned cold. Bad luck, coincidence, even illness would suddenly seem like proof the curse had taken root. The victim might begin to fear it themselves. Doubt would creep in, paranoia would fester, and all the manipulator had to do was perform. They didn't need to destroy their enemy, they only needed to convince the world that the gods would. Secret cult control. Secret cult control is one of the most disturbing manipulation tactics ever crafted, because it doesn't just recruit followers, it reshapes identities from the inside out. At its core, this method involves using mystery religions, exclusive, ritual-heavy, secretive belief systems, not to worship the divine, but to forge an elite, obedient inner circle whose loyalty is deeper than fear and stronger than reason. These were not just religions, they were psychological cages. In ancient times, mystery cults promised access to hidden truths, eternal life, or divine power, but only to the initiated. To join, one had to pass through dark rituals, symbolic deaths, oaths sealed with blood, and a blinding hierarchy of secrecy. It was intense, emotional, and often terrifying. But once inside, something irreversible happened. The mind no longer belonged to the world, it belonged to the cult. Rulers, priests, and political manipulators understood this well. By controlling a cult, they controlled hearts. They didn't need armies when they had fanatics. Elites drawn in by status and curiosity became bound by fear, pride, and a sacred sense of purpose. To leave was to risk death, or worse, exile from divine truth. To obey was to be chosen. These secret religions operated like invisible empires within empires. Their members influenced laws, war decisions, royal succession, without the public ever seeing their hands. And because the cults were cloaked in holiness, questioning them was taboo. It was a perfect trap. Offer a taste of cosmic mystery, demand unwavering loyalty, then pull the strings of power from behind a veil of incense and shadows. The elite thought they were chosen. In truth, they were puppets, devout, dangerous, and completely controlled. Dream interception. Dream interception is one of the most intimate and disturbing manipulation tactics of the ancient world, a strategy that penetrates not through force or decree, but through the sacred veil of sleep. In cultures where dreams were believed to be divine messages, every vision carried the weight of prophecy. To dream was to receive instruction from the gods, and so, to control a person's dream, or claim to, was to steer their destiny without ever lifting a weapon. This tactic worked in two terrifying ways. The first was direct suggestion. Servants, priests, or trusted companions would whisper false stories into a ruler's ear. Last night, I dreamt the gods showed me your future. Or they'd tell the court that the king had received a dream, knowing full well he hadn't, and let the rumor shape the next decision. A fake vision, once spoken aloud, gained momentum. The seed was planted, the mind did the rest. The second was even more insidious, false dreams crafted to be delivered as truth. Manipulators would describe vivid visions, symbols, omens, fates, designed to provoke action. I saw a snake at your feet and a crown fall from the sky. In a world where dreams were sacred, how could one ignore such a warning? Decisions were made, wars were started, people were exiled, all because of dreams that never were. What makes dream interception so dangerous is its invisibility. There's no violence, no spell, no evidence, just a whisper and a choice made under divine illusion. It hijacks the human longing for meaning, twisting the voice of the gods into a mouthpiece for manipulation. And once a decision is made in the name of a dream, who would dare question it? Historical revisionism. Historical revisionism is the manipulation of memory itself, the rewriting of the past to serve the present. It is not just altering records, it is erasing truth, bending time, and forging a legacy out of lies. In the ancient world, where history was written by hand and spoken through generations, whoever held the scrolls or commanded the scribes didn't just shape the narrative, they became the gods of memory. A disgraced ruler could rewrite a failed war as a divine victory. A corrupt dynasty could erase a revolution by simply omitting it from the temple walls. Entire bloodlines could vanish with the stroke of a chisel, their names carved off monuments, their existence swallowed by silence. History wasn't a record, it was a weapon, and the people had no idea. This tactic worked because the past anchors the present. When people are taught to believe they come from heroes, they follow with pride. When shameful truths disappear, no one seeks justice. When tyrants become saviors in the annals of time, obedience becomes legacy. And so those in power rewrote failures into fables. They buried massacres beneath marble. They recast betrayal as divine strategy. The emotional weight is suffocating. When your history has been stolen, so has your identity. Generations live under the shadow of a myth, shaped by ghosts that never were. The truth is lost, not in battle, but in ink, in silence, in time. And the most terrifying part? No one ever knows. They only remember what they were told, and what they were told was exactly what the manipulator wanted them to believe. Spiritual bribery. Spiritual bribery is a manipulation tactic that exploits the desperate need for control in a chaotic world by turning divine worship into a public transaction. In ancient societies where gods were believed to rule over harvest, war, fertility, and fate itself, making offerings was seen as a sacred duty. But manipulators twisted this sacred act into something far darker, a performance of sacrifice designed not to commune with the gods, but to manipulate the people. At its core, spiritual bribery is about spectacle. A ruler or priest doesn't just offer a lamb to the gods in quiet reverence. They stage it. They slay oxen in front of trembling crowds, burn mountains of incense on temple steps, and proclaim that this is why the rains will come, why the plague will end, why the gods will favor the city. And if the rain does come, proof. If it doesn't, more sacrifices, more control. It is a lie wrapped in holiness, the illusion that the divine can be bought, and only the powerful know the price. The people watch in awe, believing their salvation lies in the hands of the one who gives the gods their due. But behind the curtain, it's all strategy, each sacrifice calculated to distract from corruption, to justify war, to rally a nation, or to silence rebellion. Spiritual bribery doesn't demand belief, it demands fear. Fear that without the blood on the altar, chaos will reign. And so the manipulator plays both priest and puppet master, feeding the gods in public while feeding their own power in secret. Divination Monopoly, Divination Monopoly is a sinister manipulation tactic that transformed sacred insight into exclusive power. In ancient civilizations where omens were seen as divine signals, messages from gods hidden in the stars, the entrails of animals, or the patterns of birds. Controlling who could read those signs meant controlling what the gods were saying. And if you owned the voice of the divine, you owned the will of the people. This tactic wasn't just about religion. It was psychological domination, masked as sacred duty. Only approved priests, seers, or oracles were allowed to interpret omens. Anyone else who tried was punished as a heretic, a fraud, or a danger to order. This created a closed system where truth could be filtered, distorted, or invented entirely. The people believed they were hearing the gods, but they were only hearing the voice of the ruling class. Leaders used this monopoly to justify wars, crush opposition, anoint successors, and declare divine punishments for enemies. A single manipulated reading, Mars rises in wrath, or the flight of the raven favors the king, could sway entire nations. And because the interpreters wore robes, spoke in riddles, and evoked awe, no one dared question their authority. They weren't just advisors, they were gatekeepers of reality. Emotionally, this tactic is devastating. It turns faith into a trap. It replaces intuition with dependency. People no longer look to the heavens with wonder. They wait for permission to feel hope, or fear, or courage. And in doing so, they surrender their agency. When you control the omens, you control not just the future, but how people see the future. And in the hands of a skilled manipulator, that power is absolute. Astrological intimidation. Astrological intimidation is a cold, calculated manipulation tactic that turns the cosmos into a weapon. In a world where people believed the stars dictated their fate, predicting doom wasn't just a warning, it was a curse. By claiming that celestial alignments foretold someone's downfall, manipulators could ruin reputations, destroy confidence, and isolate rivals, all without ever touching them. It wasn't slander, it was destiny. This tactic worked because astrology wasn't just mystical, it was institutional. Courts had royal astrologers. Generals consulted the heavens before battle. Birth charts were political tools, so when an astrologer declared that Mars was in opposition to someone's natal sign, or that a blood moon foretold their disgrace, it stuck. It didn't need to be true. The fear alone was enough to make people doubt the target's stability, trustworthiness, or even sanity. Rivals would panic, delay decisions, lose allies. Others distanced themselves, not wanting to be caught in the fallout of a doomed fate. Whole armies hesitated to follow a leader cursed by the stars. Even those who didn't believe would whisper about it, because no one wanted to tempt fate. The manipulator sat back, watching their enemy unravel from the inside out. The brilliance of astrological intimidation lies in its deniability. It's not me saying this, it's the stars. That sentence absolved the accuser of responsibility while staining the target's name with cosmic dread. It made power feel holy and opposition feel suicidal. And in the minds of the people, nothing is more terrifying than the idea that the heavens themselves have already decided your end. Cult indoctrination. Cult indoctrination is a manipulation tactic that doesn't just control people, it rewires them. It uses esoteric knowledge, secret rituals, and spiritual elitism to trap followers in a mental cage they can't see. In ancient times, mystery cults and secret orders offered more than religion. They offered meaning, belonging, and access to hidden truths. But beneath the mystique was a brutal psychological strategy. Give someone just enough sacred knowledge to make them feel chosen, then slowly drown them in obedience. Initiation began with reverence. New members were told they were special, that they had been selected to receive truths too powerful for ordinary minds. The secrecy made it feel holy. The rituals, often symbolic deaths and rebirths, created emotional trauma that bound the initiate to the group. Then came the layers of esoteric doctrine, delivered in fragments, always just beyond full comprehension. The message was clear: You are closer to the divine than everyone else, but to go further, you must surrender everything. It was never about truth. It was about control. The teachings were often circular, self-reinforcing, impossible to question. Doubt was framed as impurity. Dissent meant spiritual death. The deeper one went, the more they feared leaving. Because leaving didn't just mean walking away. It meant losing enlightenment, family, identity. It meant becoming lost. Manipulators used this indoctrination to build unshakable loyalty. Followers gave up wealth, families, even lives, because they believed they were part of something eternal. But the truth was darker. They weren't enlightened. They were imprisoned by symbols, by secrecy, and by the terrifying idea that outside the cult, they were nothing. Selective propaganda tablets. Selective propaganda tablets were one of the most deceptively powerful tools of manipulation in the ancient world because they didn't scream, they whispered. Crafted to appear sacred, historical, or divine, these stone or clay inscriptions were placed in public spaces, temples, markets, courts, where all could see them. But what the people didn't know was that these tablets weren't neutral records or eternal truths. They were hand-picked lies, edited realities, carefully curated fragments designed to shape the minds of the masses without anyone realizing they were being controlled. A ruler would commission a tablet detailing a divinely approved victory, leaving out the mass slaughter. A high priest might inscribe a law revealed by the gods, conveniently aligning with their personal agenda. A city could immortalize the shame of a rival or glorify its own failures as noble sacrifice. These weren't records. They were traps. Once etched in stone, the propaganda became truth. Who would dare question what had been carved by the hands of scribes under the eye of heaven? This tactic preyed on memory. In a time when most people couldn't read or write, tablets weren't just texts. They were sacred monuments. Their permanence gave them power. Their placement gave them reach. People didn't debate them. They absorbed them, slowly, subconsciously. Over time, public opinion shifted, not through speech or violence, but through quiet repetition, anchored in stone. Selective propaganda tablets didn't need to shout to enslave minds. They stood still, unchanging, lying in plain sight until the people forgot they were lies at all. Priestly espionage. Priestly espionage is a manipulation tactic that invades the most sacred corners of the human soul. It is the deliberate use of religious figures, not as spiritual guides, but as covert informants, weaponizing confession, ritual, and divine trust to gather secrets and maintain control. In ancient societies where priests stood as the intermediaries between humanity and the gods, to confess was to cleanse, to be heard was to be forgiven. But for the manipulators, this wasn't about salvation. It was about surveillance. Behind the incense, behind the sacred chants, behind the reassuring nods of absolution, some priests were listening with purpose. They were collecting names, doubts, sins, ambitions, not to heal, but to report. The confessional became a funnel straight into the ears of kings, pharaohs, emperors, anyone who understood that knowledge was power, and that the easiest way to learn someone's truth was to make them beg to tell it. This tactic was especially devastating because it preyed on vulnerability. People came to confess their deepest fears, their betrayals, their forbidden desires. They opened their chests and spilled their hearts, believing they were safe, that the divine was listening. And in that sacred silence, their words were stolen. Political enemies were identified and eliminated. Rebellious thoughts were suffocated before they ever reached the surface. Families were turned against each other, all in the name of faith. And worst of all, the victims never suspected they'd been betrayed because they thought they were speaking to God. It's a chilling truth. When confession is corrupted, the soul becomes a weapon against itself. And those who hold the robes, the rites, the rituals, hold the keys to invisible prisons no one ever sees until it's far too late. Public weeping. Public weeping is one of the most emotionally manipulative tactics ever practiced because it bypasses logic and stabs straight into the heart. In ancient times, where honor, shame, and spectacle shaped power, the image of a powerful figure collapsing into tears could overturn fate itself. A ruler facing rebellion, a priest caught in scandal, a noble accused of betrayal, all could fall to their knees, eyes streaming, voice trembling, and suddenly, everything changed. At its core, public weeping is about control through vulnerability, but a vulnerability that is calculated, rehearsed, and weaponized. Tears transform guilt into suffering. They turn anger into pity. They erase memory and rewrite motives. When the crowd sees a leader weep, they are disarmed. Because how can you punish someone who looks broken, who appears so deeply human, who feels the pain too? This tactic was used in courts, temples, even on bloody battlefields. A fallen general could cry over the corpses of his own mistakes and emerge a tragic hero. A manipulative queen might wail before the gods, accusing the stars of cruelty while hiding her schemes in her sobs, and the people, conditioned to believe that emotion equals truth, would offer sympathy, forgiveness, even loyalty. But the brilliance and the horror of public weeping lies in its ability to reverse the roles. The oppressor becomes the victim, the guilty becomes the wounded, the accused becomes the misunderstood soul fighting back tears. It's not just a show of sorrow, it's a hijacking of empathy. And in a world where perception is power, there are few things more dangerous than a liar who knows exactly when to cry. Mass orgy distraction. Mass orgy distraction is a manipulation tactic as grotesque as it is genius, an orchestrated descent into hedonism used to pacify the restless, silence the angry, and keep the masses too drunk on pleasure to notice their chains. In ancient times, when unrest simmered or questions grew too loud, rulers and priesthoods would unleash chaos disguised as liberation. Lavish festivals, ritual orgies, nights soaked in wine, music, sweat, and abandon, offered not as gifts, but as anesthetics. This wasn't decadence for decadence's sake, it was strategy. When citizens danced naked beneath torches and gods, when they lost themselves in bodies in ecstasy, they forgot to revolt. Questions about justice, inequality, tyranny, those disappeared in a haze of sensual overload. Lust drowned logic. Hunger became satisfaction. Rage was burned up in ritual fires of flesh. The manipulator knew this. People who are overstimulated don't organize. They don't remember their suffering when they're chasing forbidden desires made suddenly legal for one night only. And afterward, they're too ashamed, too hungover, too emotionally disoriented to rise. They thank their rulers for the freedom, not realizing they've been bribed with their own destruction. In some cases, these events were sold as holy rituals, symbolic unions with gods, fertility rites, sacred celebrations, but underneath the divine mask was pure psychological warfare. The people felt free for a moment, but in truth, they were being disarmed, not with swords, not with laws, but with pleasure. It is the oldest lie of empire. You are free because you may indulge, but by the time the music stops and the fire dies down, the chains are tighter than ever, and no one remembers how they got there. Divine marriage rituals. Divine marriage rituals are among the most theatrical and psychologically manipulative tactics ever used to secure power, because they don't just forge alliances, they fabricate divinity. In ancient civilizations where gods were believed to choose rulers, the idea of marrying a deity wasn't just symbolic, it was a declaration of cosmic approval. By performing a sacred union with a god or goddess, rulers didn't merely ask for legitimacy, they claimed it, publicly, irrevocably. Picture a king standing in a temple, solemn and radiant, flanked by high priests and flaming altars. A veiled priestess representing the goddess, sometimes drugged, sometimes chosen, approaches in silence.
Ritual chants echo, vows are spoken, offerings burned, and with that moment, the ruler is no longer a man. He is a divine consort, a chosen vessel, and anyone who defies him, they defy the gods themselves. This tactic was pure genius. It wrapped raw ambition in sacred cloth. It turned political insecurity into spiritual destiny. Rulers who faced threats to their reign didn't need to crush their enemies. They married heaven instead. And once the people believed the gods were in love with their king, loyalty became devotion. Fear became worship. Some ancient queens even claimed to be brides of divine powers, asserting their right to rule in patriarchal systems by becoming the living partners of celestial lords. The people, gripped by ritual and spectacle, bowed not just to their leader, but to the divine marriage that sanctified their rule. It wasn't love, it wasn't faith, it was power, performed, sanctified, and sealed with the illusion that the heavens had spoken and chosen their bride or groom in flesh. Ceremonial Self-Punishment. Ceremonial self-punishment is a ruthless manipulation tactic masked as humility, an act of staged repentance designed to deflect anger, disarm enemies, and win back public trust without ever surrendering true power. In ancient courts and temples, when a ruler, priest, or official was caught in scandal or failure, they did not always deny it. Instead, they stepped into the spotlight and bled for forgiveness, metaphorically or sometimes literally, not to repent but to reset the narrative. Picture it. A powerful figure kneels in the town square, stripped of royal robes, ash smeared across their face, weeping before a watching crowd. They tear their garments, beg the gods, even strike themselves or take a symbolic punishment. The people watch, stunned. Pity replaces rage. And just like that, the manipulator regains control, because nothing manipulates like the illusion of remorse. But this performance is not for redemption. It is for recalibration. The manipulator knows that when people see someone suffer, even if symbolically, they project sincerity onto the act. The public feels moral superiority, even mercy. It satisfies the bloodlust without threatening the hierarchy. They don't ask for resignation. They don't demand justice. They believe the pain has already been paid. This tactic is emotional alchemy, guilt turned into power, shame transmuted into sympathy. And afterward, the one who staged it often returns stronger, seen not as a tyrant, but as a flawed but human figure who was courageous enough to suffer before their people. It is the performance of vulnerability used to maintain dominance, a false crucifixion that feeds on our deepest instincts for forgiveness, while hiding the cold calculation underneath. Altered ritual calendars. Altering ritual calendars is a manipulation tactic, so subtle it often goes unnoticed, but its power to bend time and control belief is immense. In ancient societies, the calendar was sacred. Festivals, harvests, fasts, coronations, every major event was tied to the divine rhythm of the seasons and the will of the gods. But what happens when those rhythms are tampered with? When sacred days are no longer about honoring the divine, but about serving the ambitions of men? This tactic involved shifting the dates of holy festivals, feasts, or sacrifices to align with political agendas. A king might delay a religious celebration to coincide with his military triumph, so the people would see his victory as divinely ordained. A corrupt priesthood could advance a sacred fast to suppress a riot, or reschedule an important feast to compete with a rival ceremony and drain their public support. It was emotional engineering masked as divine timing. The brilliance of this manipulation lies in how deeply people trusted the calendar. When a holy day came, they celebrated. When it passed, they mourned. They didn't ask why it had changed, because only the elite knew how to read the stars, interpret omens, or track lunar cycles, and so they obeyed the new dates without realizing they were being led like cattle
through a ritual maze built for control, not worship. Altering the calendar meant altering memory, changing traditions, rewriting what the people felt and when they felt it. It was power over time itself, and with it, the power to make every moment seem chosen, sacred, and inevitable, even when it was all a lie. Superstition Engineering. Superstition engineering is the dark art of inventing invisible rules, fabricated taboos, cursed behaviors, and sacred don'ts to control minds through fear rather than force. In ancient societies where every shadow could hide a spirit and every mistake could anger a god, manipulating superstition wasn't just clever, it was terrifyingly effective. By creating new taboos and planting them into the cultural psyche, rulers and priests could dictate what people ate, who they touched, what paths they walked, even what thoughts they dared to think. This tactic didn't need guards or chains. It worked by wrapping behavior in consequence, unseen, unquestionable, divine. Don't eat this fruit or your child will die. Don't speak after sunset or spirits will steal your soul. Don't cross this threshold unless you've bathed in sacred water. Suddenly, people were policing themselves, not because of laws, but because of fear of invisible punishment, fear of eternal damnation, fear of breaking a rule they didn't create but had been taught to obey from birth. Those in power used these engineered superstitions to maintain dominance without lifting a sword. A priest could forbid questioning doctrine by declaring it a sin. A ruler could sanctify obedience, making rebellion not just illegal, but cosmically cursed. Even daily routines became rituals of control. What makes this tactic so chilling is how deep it goes. It doesn't just touch the mind, it roots itself in culture, in childhood, in instinct. People forget where the rules came from. They just follow. And the manipulators? They disappear behind the illusion of divine order, having engineered a society that obeys not because it must, but because it believes it must. Sacrificial Framing. Sacrificial framing is a terrifying manipulation tactic that transforms fear into fury by blaming enemies for natural disasters through ritual contexts, then demanding their sacrifice to restore balance. In ancient civilizations where plagues, droughts, floods, and eclipses were not random events but divine messages, those in power learned to twist catastrophe into opportunity. When the sky darkened or crops failed, the people cried out for answers, and the manipulator gave them one. It was them. The them could be anyone, a political rival, a foreigner, a heretic, a rebellious priest. The ruling class would declare, often through an oracle or priest, that the gods were angry, not at chance, but at impurity, at betrayal, at an evil festering in the heart of the community. Suddenly, the disaster had a face. The rituals followed, a grand procession, chants, fire, blood. The accused, often chosen for political convenience, was presented as the cursed one, the scapegoat whose life would cleanse the land. The crowd, hungry for relief, desperate for meaning, watched as justice was performed in the name of peace. The manipulator stood above it all, not as executioner, but as savior. But it was never about divine balance. It was about eliminating threats, about redirecting pain into hatred, about offering the people a target so they wouldn't question the system that let them suffer in the first place. The emotional damage ran deep. Sacrificial framing didn't just kill a person, it rewrote their legacy, painted them as the villain in the minds of all who remained, and the people, manipulated by fear and ritual awe, helped destroy the very soul they were taught to hate. Eclipse Exploitation. Eclipse exploitation is a manipulation tactic that hijacks the heavens themselves to provoke fear, awe, and unquestioning obedience. In the ancient world, where the cosmos was believed to reflect the will of gods and spirits, an eclipse was not a scientific event. It was a celestial omen, a swallowed sun, a blood moon, a warning that reality had shifted, and those who understood this fear could weaponize it. Rulers, Priests and warlords timed their messages and actions to coincide with eclipses, presenting them not as natural phenomena, but as divine signs, proof of favor, punishment, or impending doom. A king about to wage war might step onto the palace balcony as the moon darkened the sun, proclaiming it a sign that the gods demanded blood. A prophet could predict disaster, and when the eclipse arrived, even skeptics fell to their knees. It didn't matter that the stars followed patterns. What mattered was that the masses didn't know those patterns. They believed. The emotional impact was devastating. When the sky goes dark in the middle of the day, the human mind reverts to its oldest fears, fear of abandonment, of chaos, of divine anger. In that vulnerable state, people become desperate for meaning, and the manipulator is there to provide it. Obey me and the sun will return. Sacrifice and the gods will forgive you. It wasn't science. It was theater, cosmic theater, staged by those who knew how to pull the emotional strings. And when the light returned, as it always did, the people praised the one who restored it, never realizing they'd just been ruled by a shadow, a trick of timing, and a lie hidden in the sky. Enchanted Items Hoax. The Enchanted Items Hoax is a manipulation tactic rooted in wonder, greed, and the desperate human hunger for meaning. It involves the deliberate fabrication or misrepresentation of ordinary objects as vessels of divine or magical power, used not to heal or protect, but to deceive, control, and elevate the manipulator to near godlike status. In a world where mystery ruled and miracles were believed to walk among mortals, claiming an object was blessed or cursed could change the fate of nations. Imagine a cracked stone said to bring fertility, a sword declared unbreakable by divine will, or a simple trinket framed as the tear of a goddess. These weren't relics, they were props, stagecraft for spiritual con artists. And when people believed in their power, the manipulator didn't need armies or gold. They had faith, faith bought with lies. These objects were placed in temples, worn by rulers, carried into battle, or passed around as sacred proof of divine favor. They validated authority, stirred devotion, and created awe. Crowds gathered to touch them. Enemies feared them. Followers gave everything to be near them. And all the while, the object itself was nothing, just wood, metal, bone. Its power wasn't real. The belief was. The genius of this hoax is emotional. People project their hopes, fears, and needs into the object. They see what they want to see, and the manipulator counts on it, because once the item becomes sacred in the minds of the people, it doesn't matter what it actually is. It becomes a symbol, and symbols, even fake ones, can rule empires, start wars, and enslave souls without ever speaking a word. Forgery of royal decrees. Forgery of royal decrees is a manipulation tactic rooted in deception so precise it reshapes reality. In the ancient world, where the word of a king was law and a stamped seal could decide life or death, forging an official decree wasn't just fraud, it was psychological warfare. A single scroll bearing a royal insignia could raise armies, disband councils, execute traitors, or crown new heirs. And when that power was faked, it didn't just bend rules, it bent loyalty itself. This tactic preyed on a society where few could read and fewer dared question authority. A forged decree would appear overnight, carried by trusted messengers, read aloud in temples or town squares. By order of the king, it would begin. And just like that, the people moved. Soldiers shifted allegiance. Judges reversed decisions. Rivals fled. Because when a royal edict spoke, no one stopped to ask if it was real. They just obeyed. The genius of this manipulation lies in its simplicity. With ink, wax, and a stolen or replicated seal, one could hijack an entire chain of command. It sowed confusion, fractured unity, and forced swift, irreversible choices. Often, by the time the forgery was discovered, the damage was done. Alliances had crumbled,
enemies had been purged, or the throne had changed hands. Emotionally, it was paralyzing. People lived in a world where truth wore the mask of authority. They didn't know who to follow, what to trust, or whether their loyalty was treason in disguise. And that's exactly what the manipulator wanted. Not clarity, but chaos. Because in chaos, control becomes easier to steal, especially when it arrives rolled in parchment, sealed in wax, and whispered in the voice of a king who never spoke. Forgery of royal decrees. Forgery of royal decrees is a manipulation tactic rooted in elegant deception and ruthless ambition. It involves crafting counterfeit orders, proclamations, or divine mandates bearing the seal of a king, emperor, or sacred authority, all to twist reality, redirect loyalty, and destabilize power from the shadows. In ancient times, when royal words were law and seals were sacred, a forged decree didn't just carry political weight, it carried the voice of fate itself. A conspirator might forge a scroll declaring a change in succession, inciting nobles to switch allegiance overnight. A false order could send soldiers into unauthorized wars, provoke executions, or grant illegitimate power to a favored ally. People wouldn't question it because the decree looked real. The signature glistened with wax. The seal bore the God-marked emblem. In an age where literacy was rare, illusion was authority. What makes this tactic terrifying is its simplicity. With the right words and a stolen seal, a manipulator could invert an entire system of trust. Confusion spread like wildfire. Who is the rightful ruler? Is this law valid? Should I obey or resist? Entire factions collapse under the weight of doubt planted by a single forged scroll. And in the chaos, the forger steps forward, calm, prepared, positioned. The false decree breaks the world open, just wide enough for them to step through. It's not just lying, it's hijacking reality, turning the machinery of power against itself, and making loyalty a weapon that cuts in both directions. Sanctuary exploitation. Sanctuary exploitation is the manipulation of mercy itself, the use of sacred refuge as leverage to twist justice, harbor control, and shield those who should fall. In ancient societies, temples and holy grounds offered sanctuary, a divine protection from violence and punishment. It was meant to be sacred space, untouched by vengeance, but in the hands of manipulators, it became a throne of impunity. A criminal with influence could flee to the altar, knowing no blade could follow him across that line. A political enemy, guilty or innocent, might be allowed sanctuary, creating public sympathy while behind the scenes, alliances were being built or enemies were neutralized. Sanctuary became a chess piece. Offering it could earn favor, refusing it could stir unrest, and exploiting it could turn law into spectacle. Religious leaders too played this game. They granted asylum not out of compassion, but for gain. They hid fugitives in exchange for loyalty, gold, or political leverage. Entire cities watched as murderers, traitors, and schemers were protected beneath the gaze of gods. The people, torn between faith and justice, were forced to choose sides, and the manipulator always won because sanctuary offered the perfect illusion, righteousness. This tactic shattered accountability. It blurred the line between sacred duty and strategic protection, and worst of all, it corrupted one of humanity's oldest instincts, to protect the vulnerable. In the end, sanctuary wasn't about safety, it was about power, and knowing that sometimes the best place to hide isn't in the shadows, but in the light of the divine. Demonic possession claims. Demonic possession claims are a deeply disturbing manipulation tactic that turn fear of the unseen into a weapon of social annihilation. In ancient cultures where spirits, demons, and curses were seen as real, living forces that could invade the body, to accuse someone of possession was to strip them of humanity. It wasn't just slander, it was spiritual assassination. The accused became an object of terror, an embodiment of chaos, a threat
to the divine order. This tactic was often used not out of belief, but out of strategy. A rival gaining influence claim they speak in strange tongues, tremble in prayer, or act erratically under the moon. A priest threatening corruption accuse him of hiding a dark entity. A woman too outspoken say she is bewitched. The accusation alone could destroy them. It bypassed evidence, logic, defense. You cannot argue with a demon. The fear was primal. People turned on neighbors overnight. Families disowned their own blood. Rituals of cleansing often turned into torture. Public exorcisms humiliated, mutilated, or even killed the innocent, all justified as saving the community from evil. The manipulator, meanwhile, played the role of the righteous protector, basking in the spotlight of moral authority while their enemies burned beneath it. And the most horrifying part? Once labeled possessed, the victim's every word, every tear, every scream of innocence became proof of the demon inside. There was no way out. It was the perfect lie, one that fed on superstition, mass fear, and the human need to blame something dark when power shifts hands. The devil didn't need to exist. He only had to be named. Poisoning the well, literally. Poisoning the well, literally, is one of the most chilling and underhanded manipulation tactics in ancient history. It involves the deliberate contamination of a water source, not to kill, but to provoke panic, illness, and chaos, all while convincing the masses that the gods themselves are angry. In a time when survival depended on clean water and divine favor, this tactic turned a basic need into a holy warning, and the manipulator became the only one who claimed to understand the cure. A village's well turns sour. Children fall sick, animals die, the water stinks of rot or turns red with hidden minerals or blood. The people don't understand chemistry, they understand wrath. They kneel, they cry, they beg the gods for forgiveness, and then comes the priest, or the warlord, or the ruler, offering a sacrifice, a command, a change in leadership. Suddenly, obedience becomes atonement, fear replaces reason, and the poisoner walks away as a savior. This tactic is emotional devastation. It turns purity into threat, survival into guilt. The people don't just fear the sickness, they believe they caused it, that their sins tainted the water, that their disobedience brought divine punishment. And in that moment of desperation, they'll believe anything, do anything, submit to anyone who claims they can make it stop. No one suspects that the blight came not from the heavens, but from the hands of the very person demanding their loyalty. It's not just poisoning water, it's poisoning belief. The body suffers, but the mind is enslaved, and by the time the truth surfaces, if it ever does, it's already far too late. Blessed coins circulation. Blessed coins circulation is a subtle yet deeply manipulative tactic that fuses spiritual awe with economic control. In ancient societies where divine favor determined kingship and wealth was seen as a sign of the gods' blessing, rulers discovered a chillingly effective trick. Mint coins not just with your image, but with symbols of sacred power, a sun disk, a holy beast, a divine eye, a god's name, then spread them like prayers disguised as currency. To the common person, holding such a coin wasn't just a financial act, it was spiritual contact. It felt like proof that the ruler was chosen, that the heavens endorsed the throne. Every trade, every payment, every transaction became a silent reinforcement of divine legitimacy. The manipulator didn't need temples or sermons. The propaganda was already in every hand, in every pocket, whispering silently, "This ruler is sacred. This ruler is untouchable." The brilliance of this tactic lies in its psychological layering. People trust what they touch. If their bread comes through coins marked by godly favor, they internalize the belief without questioning it. The coins become more than metal. They become talismans, and the ruler becomes more than human. He becomes myth. But the manipulation doesn't stop there. In times of unrest, new coins would be issued with more aggressive symbols: lightning bolts, war gods, heavenly comets, each one stoking fear or awe. The ruler didn't have to justify himself. The gods had already spoken, through silver, through copper, through gold. And the people believed, not because they heard a speech, but because they spent the lie, touched the lie, lived with the lie every single day. False succession rituals. False succession rituals are a masterstroke of ancient deception, grand ceremonies forged to make a lie look like divine destiny. This manipulation tactic involves staging royal rites of passage, coronations, blessings, anointings, without legitimate approval, lineage, or sacred sanction, to fabricate the appearance of rightful rule. In a time when kingship wasn't just political, but spiritual, the illusion of divine endorsement was often more powerful than blood itself. Imagine a rival prince or military leader storming the capital, not with an army, but with a priest bought in secret, a sacred oil stolen from the temple, and a crown hastily placed upon his head while torches blaze and chants echo through the halls. The ritual is incomplete, unauthorized, false. But it doesn't matter. The crowd sees robes, they hear the hymns, they watch the crown descend, and their hearts betray them. They believe. This tactic doesn't demand truth. It demands spectacle, because people are far more likely to obey what looks holy than what is legal. In moments of instability, the masses cling to symbols, to signs that order is returning. And so the manipulator gives them a show, just enough ritual to silence doubt, just enough theater to simulate the sacred. Once the lie is cemented in memory, undoing it becomes nearly impossible. To question the ritual is to question the gods, and by then, the new ruler sits on the throne, protected not by lineage, but by belief. The real heir may scream from exile, but no one listens. The pageantry has already written history, and the impostor, cloaked in stolen ceremony, becomes untouchable, not because he was chosen, but because he faked being chosen just well enough. Public confession coercion. Public confession coercion is a cold, calculated tactic of domination, forcing an individual to admit fault or guilt, not in private, but before the eyes of the crowd. It is not about justice. It is not about truth. It is about submission. In ancient times, when honor was everything and reputation shaped destiny, making someone kneel and speak their shame aloud was the ultimate ritual of psychological control. This tactic was used to break spirits, not just bodies. A rival, a dissenter, a once trusted ally would be dragged into the public square or temple courtyard, surrounded by onlookers, some silent, some sneering. They would be ordered to confess to a crime, to a betrayal, to false beliefs, to weakness. Sometimes it was scripted. Sometimes it was extracted through days of humiliation. Always, it was orchestrated to crush dignity and make an example. And the crowd learned the real lesson. This is what happens when you challenge power. The manipulator didn't need to imprison everyone, just a few. The rest would fall in line after watching one of their own stripped of identity and forced to bow. Even more disturbing, these confessions often included declarations of loyalty to the very force that shattered them. I was wrong. The king is merciful. The gods have shown me the truth. These words weren't just admissions. They were offerings, performances of broken faith reassembled under someone else's control. What made this tactic so terrifying is its permanence. The confession lived in memory, in gossip, in written record. Long after the voice had gone quiet, the shame echoed, and the manipulator stood taller, not by lifting himself up, but by publicly hollowing someone else. Oracle seeding. Oracle seeding is a manipulation tactic as quiet as it is devastating, an invisible hand behind the divine curtain. It involves strategically placing loyal followers, spies, or informants near sacred oracles, not to receive prophecy, but to shape it. In ancient times, when a single whispered phrase from a trance-bound oracle could launch wars, crown kings, or silence revolts. Controlling what that oracle said meant controlling fate itself, and those who understood this didn't seek answers from the gods, they planted them. This tactic began subtly. A trusted aide joins the oracle's inner circle. A temple servant is replaced. A gift is given. Over time, influence seeps in like smoke. Information about political movements, enemies, or preferred leaders is fed to the oracle's ears, quietly, persistently, until it begins to take root. And when the time is right, the oracle speaks. The gods favor the West. Beware the one with the broken crest. A red-cloaked ruler shall rise. The audience hears mystery. The manipulator hears victory. What makes oracle seeding so dangerous is its mask of holiness. The people trust the prophecy because it comes wrapped in divine mystique, but the words are no longer pure. They've been scripted, shaped, infected, and no one knows because no one dares to question the sacred. With this power, kings are made to seem inevitable. Rivals are marked as cursed. Armies are directed like pawns across a spiritual chessboard, all without a single visible order. It is prophecy by design, belief engineered, and the gods, silence, replaced by whispers planted in the dark, spoken through trembling lips, and accepted as destiny. Haruspacy Fraud. Haruspacy Fraud is a chilling manipulation tactic that turns sacred ritual into staged theater, where divine messages are not found in the entrails of sacrificed animals, but planted, twisted, and faked to serve the manipulator's agenda. In the ancient world, Haruspi says those who read the livers, hearts, and organs of animals were believed to translate the will of the gods. A twisted liver might warn of doom, a flawless heart might promise victory, and because the gods did not speak directly, people believed through the priest's voice. That trust became the perfect weapon. This tactic involves deliberately staging or tampering with these rituals. A priest loyal to a ruler would slit open a beast in a private chamber, tamper with its organs, scar them, dye them, replace them, then emerge before the crowd with the divine reading. The gods forbid war, he might declare, halting dissent, or victory is certain, sending thousands to die under a lie. No one questioned the reading. To do so was heresy. The emotional grip of Haruspacy Fraud lies in its cruel elegance. People want to believe the divine speaks. They need assurance in uncertainty. And when a trusted priest holds up blood-soaked organs and interprets destiny, it feels real, unarguable, sacred. But it's not. It's theater performed with flesh and fear. This manipulation allowed rulers to justify conquests, suppress rebellions, silence rivals, and manipulate entire populations without a drop of real prophecy, just carefully arranged blood. And as the crowd wept, prayed, or cheered, they never knew the gods had been replaced by the hands of a liar in robes. Mock sacrifices. Mock sacrifices are among the most chilling displays of psychological manipulation. Rituals designed not to appease gods, but to control men. At their core, these staged ceremonies pretend to offer up a human life, or appear moments away from doing so, all to ignite fear, awe, or obedience in the hearts of onlookers. The victim survives, but the emotional damage does not. In ancient cultures where sacrifice meant divine payment, witnessing one, real or not, was enough to terrify crowds into silence. Imagine this: a trembling man dragged to the altar, chants rising, priests calling for blood, the blade raised high, and then, just before it falls, the gods intervene. The victim is spared, the people cheer, or collapse in relief. But the message has already sunk in. This could have been real. The audience leaves not grateful, but warned, conditioned, afraid. The manipulator doesn't need to kill. They just need to make people believe death is always an option. That disobedience teeters on the edge of ritual blood. that mercy is granted only when power says so. It's terror theater, its dominance masquerading as divine mercy. These mock sacrifices often targeted criminals, enemies, or even loyal followers who agreed to the act. The goal wasn't justice, it was spectacle, something unforgettable, something primal, because when people witness a life nearly taken in the name of the gods, they don't ask questions. They kneel, they obey, and that's the cruel genius of it. No one dies, yet everyone bleeds. Coded hymns. Coded hymns are a dangerously elegant manipulation tactic. Songs crafted with hidden meanings, layered messages, and veiled allegiance designed to reshape loyalty without ever sounding like rebellion. In the ancient world, where music was not just entertainment, but a bridge to the divine, hymns were sacred, unassailable. People sang them in temples, at feasts, before war, and when the lyrics were carefully written to say one thing aloud and another in the minds of the faithful, they became a quiet revolution in disguise. A coded hymn might praise a god on the surface, but secretly exalt a ruler, or denounce a tyrant, cloaked in metaphors of falling stars and darkened temples. The untrained ear heard devotion, the initiated heard defiance, or obedience, or warning. This dual-layered communication allowed priests, poets, and rulers to manipulate public perception while avoiding direct confrontation. You couldn't be punished for what no one could prove. This tactic was especially powerful in times of unrest. A ruler facing opposition might commission hymns with symbols tied to his lineage, sun, eagle, flame, so that every time the people sang in worship, they were unknowingly reinforcing his authority. Others, seeking to erode that power, slipped subtle resistance into the same melodies. The king who forgets the harvest shall be forgotten. A line like that, sung in a crumbling empire, cuts deeper than a blade. Emotionally, the impact is hypnotic. Music bypasses logic. It embeds itself in memory, in ritual, in childhood. People hum it without thinking, sing it with tears in their eyes, never realizing the tune has been planted like a seed, one that blossoms into loyalty, fear, or rebellion, not through commands, but through melody, not through force, but through faith. Architectural traps. Architectural traps are manipulations sculpted into stone, sacred buildings designed not only to inspire reverence, but to overwhelm the senses, disorient the mind, and bend the will. These were not mere temples or palaces. They were psychological machines built to produce a singular emotional outcome: submission. In ancient civilizations, architecture wasn't just about structure, it was about power. Every towering column, shadowed corridor, echoing chamber, and impossible ceiling was carefully crafted to make humans feel small, watch, and utterly unworthy. Imagine stepping into a temple where the light filters in only through hidden cracks above, spotlighting the altar like a celestial gaze. The walls are carved with gods in colossal scale, looming, judging. Every footstep echoes as if the gods themselves are listening. You feel exposed, insignificant, and right where the builder wanted you to be. These spaces didn't just impress, they hypnotized. Architects embedded secret acoustics that turned whispers into roars, chambers that echoed with strange resonance, altars placed at unnatural heights that could only be approached by crawling or bowing. The space forced reverence. It made resistance feel blasphemous. Priests and rulers used these traps to anchor their power in stone. People weren't just told the gods were above them, they felt it in their bones. The building was the message. Doubt melted in vaulted ceilings. Pride withered beneath towering deities etched in stone. The air itself seemed sacred. This wasn't worship, it was domination through awe, because when your surroundings scream that you are nothing and something greater is always watching, you don't rebel, you believe, and belief in the right hands is the deepest trap of all. Misinterpretation of laws. Misinterpretation of laws is a sinister manipulation tactic that turns justice into a maze.
deliberately twisting ancient codes, scriptures, or decrees to confuse, mislead, and control. In ancient civilizations, laws were often written in sacred languages, cryptic symbols, or dense ceremonial phrasing understood only by priests, scribes, or elite scholars. This gave manipulators the perfect opening. Don't break the law, redefine it. Don't defy the rules, interpret them in your favor. A ruler or high priest might point to an obscure line in a stone tablet or scroll and declare it meant something entirely new. This passage grants me power over trade. This verse condemns anyone questioning my authority. Even if the original intent was neutral or protective, the meaning could be flipped with the right words, the right setting, and the right fear. And because most people couldn't read or challenge the text, they simply accepted it, terrified to argue with something sacred. This tactic weaponizes ambiguity. Laws written in metaphor or myth are ripe for abuse. By controlling the interpretation, the manipulator becomes both the lawgiver and the judge. Dissent becomes illegal, obedience becomes holy, and all of it is wrapped in the illusion of tradition. Emotionally, this tactic is paralyzing. It makes people feel powerless, lost in a system they thought was designed to protect them. When justice becomes a riddle, only the powerful know the answer. The masses are left obeying shadows, afraid to move, afraid to speak, afraid that one misunderstood word could be their undoing. It's not the law that traps them. It's the lie that the law is still theirs. Fabricated relics. Fabricated relics are sacred lies made solid, man-made objects planted, discovered, and paraded as ancient treasures to prove divine favor, ancestral right, or prophetic destiny. This manipulation tactic exploits humanity's hunger for physical evidence of the divine, the heroic, or the fated. In a world where myth and history blurred, where lineage justified rule and the gods marked their chosen with signs, a single found relic could turn a nobody into a messiah. A crown unearthed near a battlefield, said to belong to a legendary king. A broken blade pulled from a temple floor, declared to fulfill an old prophecy. A scroll sealed in gold, discovered by a priest who just happens to serve the new ruler. These weren't accidents. They were performances, planted artifacts designed to wrap lies in the weight of history. The genius of this tactic lies in its emotional payload. Relics are tangible. You can hold them, kneel before them, worship them. People don't question what they can see with their own eyes, especially when they've been conditioned to believe that divine truth must reveal itself in objects. Fabricated relics bypass skepticism by going straight to wonder. The people don't ask, "Is this real?" They ask, "What does it mean?" And in that meaning, the manipulator thrives. A fake relic can silence opposition, unify tribes, start wars, crown emperors. It's not just an object. It's a key to the collective soul, because when a lie is chiseled in stone or wrapped in silk and incense, it doesn't need to be proven. It just needs to be found at the perfect moment by the perfect person with a story already written. Witchcraft Accusation. Witchcraft accusation is a brutal manipulation tactic that turns fear into a weapon and superstition into a death sentence. In ancient and not so ancient societies where the unknown was feared and the mystical was often seen as dangerous, accusing someone of witchcraft wasn't about truth. It was about power. It was about eliminating a rival, silencing a voice, or destroying someone too clever, too loud, too different. And the beauty, if such a word can be used, for the manipulator, no proof was ever needed, only suspicion. A woman with knowledge of herbs, a man who challenged the ruling class, a healer whose popularity grew too quickly. All it took was a whisper. They're cursed. They've made a pact. I saw them under the moon. And just like that, their fate was sealed. The burden of defense fell on the accused. But how do you prove you didn't speak to demons? How do you disprove a nightmare? This tactic worked
because it triggered society's deepest terrors, the fear of invisible threats, of moral corruption, of divine punishment. The manipulator didn't need evidence, they needed emotion, panic, hysteria, and once the fire started, it consumed everything. The accused would be tortured, exiled, executed, not for what they did, but for what others believed they could do. Witchcraft accusation wasn't just social murder, it was spiritual annihilation. It cut people off from community, family, even the afterlife. And worst of all, it turned the masses into enforcers. People didn't just allow it, they participated, they watched, they cheered, all while the true manipulator stood safely in the shadows, having removed a threat with a single poisonous word, witch. Selective scripture reading. Selective scripture reading is the art of weaponizing sacred texts, not by rewriting them, but by twisting them through omission. It's a manipulation tactic that involves choosing specific verses, lines, or fragments of Holy Scripture while deliberately ignoring context, contradictions, or compassion. In ancient times, where the word of the gods was law, to read aloud from sacred texts was not to speak, it was to command, and when only certain words are chosen, they become a blade dressed in holiness. A ruler condemns rebellion by quoting a line about divine order, while omitting the verses on justice. A priest silences dissent by citing obedience to authority, conveniently skipping passages about humility or forgiveness. A conqueror declares war in the name of righteousness, echoing ancient battles written into Scripture, ignoring the pleas for peace that follow just a page later. This tactic works not because the text is false, but because it is incomplete, and that's what makes it so dangerous. The audience hears the sacred, they recognize the language, they feel the divine weight behind the words. They don't see the manipulation, they see truth. And it's devastating. With the right verse, murder becomes purification, oppression becomes discipline, tyranny becomes divine will, and the people, believing they are serving their God, become blind instruments of power. Selective scripture reading is not about faith, it's about control. It exploits reverence, hijacks morality, and buries complexity beneath cherry-picked clarity, because when only part of the truth is told, it isn't truth at all, it's doctrine forged in darkness, spoken through lips the people were taught never to doubt. Nighttime rumor seeding. Nighttime rumor seeding is a covert manipulation tactic that preys on darkness, both literal and psychological, to spread fear, shape belief, and erode trust before anyone realizes what's happening. In the ancient world, night wasn't just absence of light. It was sacred, mysterious, terrifying. It was when spirits roamed, omens whispered, and boundaries between truth and illusion blurred. That made it the perfect soil for planting rumors. Manipulators would send loyal servants, spies, or even disguised priests into marketplaces, taverns, or the edges of sleeping cities just before dawn. There, in the hush of candlelight and shadow, they whispered carefully crafted ideas. The gods are displeased. The general has betrayed us. The crops failed because of her sin. These weren't announcements. They were secrets. And secrets spoken at night feel heavier, more forbidden, more real. By morning, the rumors had already begun to take root. People awoke not with facts, but with suspicions. Gossip filled the silence before truth could catch up. And because no one knew where the story began, everyone trusted. Someone else must have seen it, heard it, known it. The manipulator stayed hidden, always. This tactic works because the human brain is more vulnerable in the dark. Night breeds doubt. It magnifies fear. It makes us search for meaning where there is none. And the rumor becomes that meaning. It spreads like smoke, untraceable, suffocating, reshaping loyalties and identities while the city sleeps. By the time the sun rises, it's too late. The damage is done, not with armies, not with laws, but with whispers in the dark, deliberate, venomous, and utterly unstoppable. Symbolic animal use. Symbolic animal use is a breathtakingly deceptive manipulation tactic that turns trained behavior into divine spectacle. At its core, this technique involves carefully training animals to perform specific acts at precise moments, so their appearance or actions seem like signs from the gods. In ancient societies, where every crow's flight, every dog's howl, every serpent's slither was seen as a message from the heavens, those who understood behavior could manufacture miracles. A dove released to land perfectly on the shoulder of a new king, anointed by the gods. A lion pacing circles around a sacred stone, just as a prophecy is read. A snake coiled silently at the feet of a priestess, choosing her as the voice of the divine. None of it random, none of it real. These were rehearsed illusions, ancient stagecraft disguised as cosmic truth. This tactic was powerful because it triggered primal awe. People didn't see training, they saw fate. They saw messages in feathers and fur. Their hearts skipped, their knees buckled, their doubts melted. Because the animal, unlike man, was thought to be pure, untouched by lies. So when it acted in alignment with prophecy, the message was undeniable. Manipulators used this tactic to crown rulers, start wars, silence heresy, or prove divine favor, all without a word of argument. The people saw the sign, and belief followed. What makes it chilling is how easily wonder is exploited. No violence, no force, just an animal, a cue, and a crowd desperate to believe. In that moment, power is transferred not through command, but through marvel. And those who orchestrated it never appeared because the gods had already spoken. Magical fear tactics. Magical fear tactics are a deeply psychological form of manipulation designed to paralyze the masses with silent terror. At their core lies one terrifying principle: belief controls behavior. In ancient societies where magic was real, curses were deadly, and talismans could seal fates, the mere sight of a charm, amulet, or carved curse could unravel a person's sense of safety without a single word spoken. Manipulators understood this all too well. They didn't need to cast spells, they only needed to look like they had. A bone charm strung on a rival's door, a doll pierced with needles placed at a market stall, an inscription written in ash or blood at the base of a temple. These objects were never explained. They didn't have to be. Their presence said everything. You are marked. You are watched. You are cursed. The emotional impact was devastating. People who believed they'd been cursed often fell ill, not from poison or magic, but from sheer panic. Their minds began to rot from within. Crops withered, it was the curse. A child fell sick, the charm did it. Social status crumbled. Friends distanced themselves. Victims isolated themselves in fear of spreading bad luck, ensuring their ruin without any need for further interference. This tactic was perfect for manipulators who wanted silent control. No accusations, no confrontation, just fear planted like a seed in the form of a feather, a bone, or a blackened symbol scrawled in the dirt. People didn't dare retaliate because they didn't know who to blame. The fear was anonymous, spiritual, and everywhere. And in that silence of paranoia, the manipulator ruled unseen, wielding terror like a curse of their own. Sacrificial substitution. Sacrificial substitution is a manipulation tactic rooted in calculated cruelty and performative mercy. It involves replacing an intended sacrificial victim, often someone of high value, social prominence, or even innocence, with a criminal, prisoner, or outcast, not to save lives, but to rewrite the narrative. The goal isn't justice, it's optics, control, the preservation of power through the illusion of virtue. In ancient societies, human sacrifice was often considered sacred currency, offered to gods to cleanse sin, ensure harvest, or avert disaster. But sometimes the cost was too high. A noble's child, a priestess marked by prophecy, a political rival whose public execution would spark unrest. So the manipulator intervenes, not to stop the ritual, but to redirect it. A thief, a heretic, a beggar is offered instead, and the people are told the gods are satisfied. This substitution does more than spare a life. It manufactures a story. The ruler appears merciful. The priest appears wise. The criminal becomes a symbol of the people's guilt, offered up so that society itself can feel cleansed. No one asks if the gods ever wanted this victim. No one asks if justice has actually been served. The sacrifice happened. The blood was spilled, and that's all they need. The brilliance of this tactic lies in its emotional complexity. The people mourn the loss, then feel relief. They're spared. Their guilt is paid by someone else. It creates the illusion of divine balance, even as corruption poisons the altar. Because in the end, the gods didn't choose the sacrifice. The powerful did, and the people thanked them for it. Battle omen. Battle omen tampering is a ruthless manipulation tactic that targets the mind before the sword ever strikes, by corrupting the sacred signs that soldiers look to for courage, purpose, and divine approval. In ancient warfare, omens were everything: the flight of birds, the way a flame flickered, the color of dawn, the shape of sacrificial entrails. These signs weren't superstition, they were law. If the gods were against you, you didn't fight. If they were silent, you hesitated. If they showed favor, you marched with fire in your blood. So the manipulator's strategy was devastating in its simplicity: falsify the sign. A priest loyal to the enemy might read a sheep's liver and proclaim doom. Birds released in secret might be trained to fly in the wrong direction before battle. An eclipse could be predicted and presented as a divine warning. Even sacred relics might be hidden, painted, or desecrated just enough to suggest divine abandonment. To the warrior, these weren't tactical setbacks, they were cosmic betrayal. The result? Fear spread like wildfire through the ranks. Men became hesitant. Superstition turned into paralysis. Leaders lost authority as soldiers questioned whether marching forward meant defying the gods. Morale shattered, not by swords, but by symbols. And the manipulator didn't need to lift a weapon. They let belief do the bleeding, because in war, the strongest army isn't always the one with the sharpest blades. It's the one that still believes it's meant to win. Battle omen tampering strips that belief bare, replacing destiny with dread. And once fear takes root in the soul of a soldier, the war is already lost. Riddle diplomacy. Riddle diplomacy is a manipulative art form wrapped in mystery, a tactic where power hides behind ambiguity, using riddles, symbols, and cryptic speech to avoid responsibility while appearing wise, even prophetic. In ancient courts and sacred temples, where every word could tip the scales of war, alliance, or betrayal, those who mastered the riddle held a shield no sword could pierce: plausible deniability. The manipulator cloaks their intent in layers. A diplomat may respond to a plea for peace, not with yes or no, but with something like, "The river runs dry when the hawk forgets to fly." It sounds profound. It stalls confrontation. It buys time. And it traps the listener in their interpretation. What did they mean? Is it a warning, a blessing? Should we act or wait? And while the opposing side spirals into confusion, second-guessing their every move, the manipulator slips out of obligation, unchallenged, untouched. Riddle diplomacy is especially powerful in hierarchies where prophecy is revered. Leaders, priests, or envoys who speak in riddles are seen not as evasive, but enlightened. To question them is to admit ignorance. And so the listener nods, smiles, and agrees to a deal they don't fully understand. But the emotional damage comes later, when promises break, when actions contradict words, and when the riddle is finally unraveled, it's too late. The manipulator shrugs. "I never said what you think I did." They didn't lie, they didn't promise, they didn't betray, but they did. Through omission, distortion, and a whisper of poetry, so vague it became a weapon. Riddled diplomacy isn't about answers, it's about keeping the other side forever asking. Holy object theft. Holy object theft is a brutal manipulation tactic that doesn't just target a people's power, it rips out their soul. In the ancient world, where sacred relics and divine icons embodied the very presence of the gods, stealing a holy object wasn't simple looting, it was spiritual decapitation. These weren't just symbols, they were the beating heart of identity, protection, and hope. And when that heart was taken, everything collapsed. A rival tribe might sneak into a city under cover of darkness, not to slay leaders or burn grain, but to steal the idol of a war god or the sacred tablet from a temple's inner sanctum. The next morning, the city would wake not to fire, but to silence, to absence. Panic would spread faster than any enemy could ride. The gods have abandoned us. We are no longer protected. The people wouldn't just fear attack, they would fear deserved destruction. This tactic was psychological warfare at its most devastating. The theft shattered faith, fragmented communities, and sowed chaos without a single drop of blood spilled. Soldiers refused to fight. Priests broke down in tears. Citizens fled or turned on one another in desperation to appease angry heavens. And the enemy, now seen as powerful enough to defy the gods themselves, became terrifying beyond measure. Worse still, the stolen object would often be paraded, desecrated, or hidden forever, never allowing closure. The wound remained open, eternal. The manipulator knew exactly what they were doing, not just conquering a people, but hollowing them from the inside, leaving behind a shell too afraid to rise again. Mock oracles. Mock oracles are a chilling manipulation tactic that exploits the deepest human hunger for meaning by feeding it lies dressed as divine truth. In ancient times, oracles were sacred. They were the breath of the gods, the voices of fate. Entire cities bent to their words. So, what happens when someone builds a false one? When a manipulator constructs an oracle not to reveal destiny, but to control it? These mock oracles were carefully staged deceptions, shrines set up in remote places with paid actors posing as priests, priestesses, and visionaries. Inside smoky chambers, false prophets delivered rehearsed divine messages to guide kings, influence trade, stir war, or suppress rebellion. The audience believed because they wanted to. They came seeking direction, desperate, vulnerable, and what they received was a script written not by the gods, but by those who stood to gain. Every detail was crafted to evoke awe, flickering torches, cryptic verses, trembling voices, sacred herbs burning in censers to cloud judgment and deepen belief. The manipulator stood behind the curtain, watching, smiling, deciding the future through a lie. The emotional damage of this tactic is devastating. People made life-altering decisions based on fraud. They gave offerings, they gave loyalty, they gave war, and all the while their faith was being siphoned into someone else's agenda. The gods never spoke, but someone did, and it was exactly what they wanted the people to hear. Mock oracles didn't need armies or temples of gold, just belief, just a voice in the dark saying, "This is what fate demands," and the world obeyed. Charisma masking is a deceptive manipulation tactic that turns borrowed admiration into power. By hiring others to speak, perform, and echo your greatness until people believe it's real. In the ancient world, charisma wasn't just charm, it was divine. Leaders were expected to radiate presence, command attention, inspire loyalty. But not everyone had that fire, so some faked it, not by changing themselves, but by surrounding themselves with worship disguised as coincidence. A ruler lacking charisma might pay poets to write glowing verses, priests to proclaim them favored by the gods, actors to recreate their victories in grand dramatizations. Crowds would gather to hear tales of bravery, humility, divine dreams, never realizing the stories were commissioned, rehearsed, bought. Courtiers would spontaneously praise them in public, whisper their virtues in sacred spaces, weep at their supposed wisdom in stage ceremonies. The illusion of greatness became louder than its absence. This tactic works because people follow momentum. When everyone around them admires someone, they begin to mirror that admiration, even if it feels hollow. The hired admiration becomes social proof. The ruler seems beloved, sacred, powerful, and those who doubt stay silent for fear of looking foolish or rebellious. Emotionally, charisma, masking is cruel because it exploits trust. It makes people believe they found a hero, a savior, a once-in-a-generation soul. They devote their hopes, loyalty, even love, only to discover they were responding not to authenticity, but to an echo chamber of lies. The manipulator never changes who they are. They just control what everyone sees. And in a world where image is everything, that illusion can be more powerful than truth ever was. Slave testimony, manipulation. Slave testimony manipulation is a ruthless, gut-wrenching tactic built on cruelty, fear, and silence disguised as truth. In many ancient civilizations, the words of slaves held no legal weight unless they were tortured. The twisted logic was this: a slave could only tell the truth if it was beaten out of them, and manipulators seized this barbaric belief to fabricate whatever truth they needed. A powerful noble wanted a rival condemned, accused them of conspiracy, then drag in their slaves. Under red-hot irons, lashes, and brutal torment, the slave's screams became a confession. "Yes," they finally gasped, "my master plotted against the king." The crowd heard guilt. The rulers saw proof, and the enemy was destroyed, not by evidence, but by agony. This tactic was never about justice. It was theater. The real audience wasn't the judge. It was the public. People saw punishment, heard confessions, believed justice had been served. But what they didn't see, what they weren't allowed to admit, was that the words of a tortured soul aren't truth. They're survival. Pain makes people say anything. The emotional impact was catastrophic. Slaves lost their lives. Innocent masters lost their freedom, their names, or their heads. The people lost faith in truth without ever realizing it. Because once torture becomes acceptable proof, anyone can be guilty. Reality becomes whatever the powerful want it to be. Slave testimony manipulation turned the voiceless into weapons. It made suffering into evidence, and it allowed tyrants to write history in blood and lies while pretending it came from justice itself. Public self-humiliation. Public self-humiliation is a chillingly strategic manipulation tactic where someone in power deliberately stages their own fall from grace, not to atone, but to disarm. It is the weaponization of shame, the performance of disgrace, carefully designed to provoke sympathy, forgiveness, and ultimately greater control. In ancient societies obsessed with honor, reputation, and divine favor, to publicly lower oneself was seen as the ultimate surrender. But for the skilled manipulator, it was a trap, bait for the emotions of the crowd. Imagine a ruler stepping onto the temple steps, barefoot, dressed in rags, ashes smeared on his forehead. He speaks of guilt, of failure, of how he has let the gods and his people down. Tears fall. He offers to abdicate, to punish himself. The people watch, stunned, and then something terrifying happens. They forgive him. They plead for him to stay. Their anger dissolves. Their loyalty tightens. The disgrace becomes a rebirth, scripted, rehearsed, devastatingly effective. Because this isn't real humility. It's controlled collapse, a staged descent into weakness that makes the crowd feel powerful, merciful, godlike in their capacity to redeem their fallen leader. The manipulator gives them that illusion, then reclaims the throne, now armored in emotional debt. This tactic exploits the human need to protect the broken. It bypasses rational judgment with raw empathy. People think they're witnessing truth, but they're being seduced. The disgrace is not a downfall, it's a performance of vulnerability used to reset power dynamics, draw enemies closer, and return stronger, cloaked not in pride, but in pity, and pity, once earned, can blind the world. Tomb inscriptions. Tomb inscriptions are a chilling manipulation tactic that rewrites history in stone, shaping legacy, not through truth, but through carefully crafted lies that outlive memory itself. In the ancient world, where death marked the passage into eternity and the written word was sacred, what was carved into a tomb became unquestioned fact. The dead could not speak, but their monuments did, and the manipulators made sure those monuments lied beautifully. A cruel ruler might be buried beneath a grand pillar inscribed with tales of mercy, wisdom, and divine favor. A failed general could be remembered as victorious, a disgraced priest painted as holy martyr. Even the most vile legacies were washed clean with golden words. He fed the poor. She was beloved by the gods. He ruled with justice unmatched in any age, and because it was written in stone, in temple script, often beside sacred symbols, people believed it. They had to. This tactic didn't seek forgiveness. It demanded reverence. It erased failures, crimes, betrayals, and replaced them with myth. And generations later, when descendants visited these tombs or read inscriptions aloud in ritual, they passed on the lie as if it were truth. The manipulator didn't just rewrite their own legacy, they infected the future with it. Emotionally, this is devastating because it robs the living of clarity and the dead of justice. The villain becomes a saint, the truth becomes a rumor, and history is sculpted not by who someone was, but by what their survivors could afford to inscribe. Tomb inscriptions weren't records, they were declarations, final words carved to outlast judgment. And for the manipulator, they offered the greatest power of all, the ability to live forever, not as they were, but as they wanted to be remembered. Astral name association. Astral name association is a psychological manipulation tactic that cloaks rulers in cosmic mystique by naming them after stars, constellations, or celestial deities to suggest they are not merely human, but fated, eternal, divine. In ancient civilizations where the night sky was a map of prophecy, gods, and meaning, to be linked with the heavens was to rise above mortal judgment. It wasn't just branding, it was myth-making. A child born into royalty might be named Son of Orion, Voice of Sirius, or He Who Rides the Scorpion. The name alone conjured power, timeless, vast, unreachable. It told the people this ruler was not chosen by men, but by the stars themselves, that their reign had been written into the sky long before their birth, that to question them was to question the universe. This tactic worked not through logic, but through awe. The stars were feared, loved, worshipped. Their alignment could start wars or bless harvests. To be bound to them linguistically gave rulers the illusion of destiny. Poets reinforced it. Priests echoed it. Astrologers found evidence of the ruler's astral alignment, cementing belief. And the people, illiterate, devout, emotionally wired to seek patterns, believed it. They saw the ruler's name in the sky and felt small. They submitted not out of duty, but reverence. They didn't serve a king. They followed a constellation. What makes this tactic so insidious is its subtlety. No force, no threat, just a name whispered under the stars, repeated in temples, carved into stone, and slowly belief takes root, not in the man, but in the myth. A ruler born from heaven, a reign written in light. Eponymous calendar control. Eponymous calendar control is a manipulation tactic that quietly infects time itself, embedding a ruler's name into the daily rhythm of life so thoroughly that the people begin to live inside the legacy of their master without even realizing it. In ancient empires, time was not just counted, it was owned. When a ruler renamed a month after themselves, like Julius did with July or Augustus with August, it wasn't an act of vanity, it was psychological conquest. This tactic is brilliant in its subtlety. Every time someone schedules a sacrifice, plans a festival, pays a tax, or celebrates a harvest, they speak the ruler's name. We'll meet in Julius. The decree takes effect in Augustus. These are not just dates, they are daily affirmations of power, baked into the language, into the seasons, into the very structure of memory. Over time, people forget their original names. They forget the sky and the stars that once guided their ancestors. All they remember is the ruler who now owns the calendar. This manipulation works because it doesn't feel like coercion. It feels like normal life. But in reality, it's a slow indoctrination, one that rewires cultural identity through repetition. Children grow up reciting names of emperors as if they are the architecture of time itself. Rebellion becomes harder when your entire reality is measured in the syllables of a tyrant. Eponymous calendar control doesn't demand loyalty with threats. It whispers it into everyday speech. It makes you believe the world turns by the will of the one in power. And eventually, it does, because time, once renamed, rarely gives itself back. Divinely timed birth claims. Divinely timed birth claims are a powerful and emotionally charged manipulation tactic that transforms the birth of a child into a symbol of destiny by asserting that they were born on a sacred day under a holy alignment or at the exact moment a prophecy foretold. In ancient societies obsessed with omens, calendars, and divine timing, this tactic allowed rulers and priests to fabricate meaning where there was none, casting a veil of cosmic significance over what was otherwise ordinary. A child is born in the palace, and within hours, a proclamation spreads. He arrived on the festival of the sun god. Her first cry echoed with the rising of the sacred moon. The stars aligned exactly as the oracle once foretold. These claims weren't random. They were rehearsed. They were crafted with precision, often retroactively altered to match holy calendars or conveniently rewritten in sacred records. And the result? The child was no longer just royal. They were chosen. This tactic worked because it touched something primal, our need to believe in fate, in signs, in lives marked by something greater. The people, already steeped in myth and ritual, accepted the narrative as divine truth. They wept with joy, bowed in reverence, offered gifts, and the child, still incapable of speech, was already protected by an armor of prophecy. But behind the incense and poetry was cold calculation. By claiming divine timing, the manipulator secured loyalty, silenced doubt, and built a legacy before the heir could even walk. It was psychological warfare dressed in swaddling clothes, an invisible crown placed upon a newborn's head by the gods themselves, or so everyone was led to believe. Controlled exorcisms. Controlled exorcisms are theatrical manipulation cloaked in holiness, public performances of demon removal, not to heal the possessed, but to showcase the power of a ruler, priest, or institution. In ancient cultures where spiritual affliction was feared more than physical illness, the sight of someone convulsing, screaming, or writhing under the influence of a demon struck terror into the hearts of the masses. But it was the cure, not the curse, that delivered control. Manipulators would stage these exorcisms deliberately. The possessed person might be a loyal servant, a mentally ill outcast, or a coerced victim. They would be paraded before a crowd, shaking, wailing, sometimes speaking in strange tongues. Then the priest, ruler, or prophet would step forward. With chants, relics, smoke, or a dramatic touch, they would drive out the spirit. The afflicted would collapse. The demon was gone, and the audience, wide-eyed and trembling, would believe they had just witnessed a miracle. This tactic worked on primal fear. People need to believe that someone has the power to stand between them and the unseen horrors of the world. The manipulator becomes that protector, divinely chosen, spiritually armed, irreplaceable. Doubters are silenced by spectacle. The faithful are bound tighter. And the enemy? Anyone who questions the ritual becomes suspect, maybe even possess themselves. Emotionally controlled exorcisms strike at the core of human vulnerability. They offer hope laced with terror, relief that comes only from submission. And in the shadows behind the stage, the manipulator smiles, because with every scream and chant, they're not just casting out demons, they're pulling power in. Mystery language use is a psychological manipulation tactic rooted in fear, awe, and the human instinct to obey what we don't understand. In the ancient world, where language itself was sacred, used in spells, scripture, prophecy, speaking in rare or arcane tongues wasn't just strange, it was divine. Manipulators learned that when you speak in words no one else can comprehend, people don't question you, they revere you or fear you. A priest might chant in a dead dialect during a ceremony. A ruler's advisor might issue cryptic commands in a forgotten tongue. A seer might whisper prophecy in foreign syllables, eyes rolled back, voice trembling with divine presence. The crowd listens, terrified and captivated. The message doesn't need to be clear. The mystery is the message. It signals power beyond their reach, wisdom too sacred for common ears. This tactic works because silence often follows confusion. Most people won't admit they don't understand, especially when the speaker is cloaked in authority or ritual. Instead, they nod, they submit. Their minds fill in the gaps with reverence or dread. The manipulator becomes otherworldly, untouchable, chosen. Worse still, the few who do understand may remain silent, fearing backlash, or may be used to translate falsely, twisting the meaning even further to suit the manipulator's goals. Mystery language use exploits our deep-rooted belief that sacred knowledge is hidden, encoded, forbidden. When someone speaks in the language of the gods, or pretends to, they gain power without needing to justify it. No argument, no logic, just awe, just fear, just obedience carved out of incomprehension, like a spell cast on the mind through words no one dares to translate. Cloaked messages in myths. Cloaked messages in myths are manipulation in its most elegant form. Truths twisted into tales, politics disguised as prophecy, and propaganda immortalized as legend. In the ancient world, myths weren't stories. They were sacred, passed through generations, etched into temples, recited by priests. They explained the gods, the world, the rules of life. But hidden beneath those tales of monsters, heroes, and divine wars were calculated messages designed to shape belief, justify power, and destroy dissent. A ruler who feared rebellion might commission a myth where a god strikes down a mortal who dared question authority. A dynasty on the brink of collapse might weave a story of divine lineage, a sun god who fathered kings, a chosen child who would save the realm. A foreign enemy could be turned into a mythic beast, cursed and hunted by holy warriors, and over time, no one would remember where the story ended and the truth began. This tactic was terrifyingly effective because it bypassed resistance. People don't argue with myths. They teach them to their children. They build temples to them. They dream by them. And when those stories carry cloaked political messages, the manipulator doesn't just influence a crowd, they program a culture. Emotionally, this manipulation is haunting. It shapes how people see good and evil, who they trust, who they fear, what they believe they are born to do. The story becomes a mirror they don't know was crafted for them. And the manipulator? They don't need thrones or swords, just ink, imagination, and the patience to let the lie become legend. Astrological love spells. Astrological love spells are a manipulative tactic that turn the stars into chains, fabricating celestial compatibility to forge emotional bonds, secure alliances, or control hearts under the illusion of fate. In ancient times, where astrology governed everything from war to childbirth, love was no exception. If the stars said two souls were destined, who dared question it? Manipulators learned to exploit this trust by falsifying cosmic alignments, crafting love not from connection, but from control. A ruler's advisor might read two birth charts and declare them a perfect match, despite knowing the stars were never aligned. A priestess might whisper to a wealthy noble that the stars had revealed their soulmate was someone specific, someone chosen by the manipulator for political gain. It didn't matter how false it was. Once the idea was planted, it burrowed deep. This tactic works because love is the most irrational battlefield. When people want something to be true, they cling to signs, and when those signs come from the heavens, they become undeniable. The victim believes it's destiny. They open their heart, their bed, their fortune, believing they're following the universe, when really they're walking into a carefully laid trap. The emotional manipulation cuts deep. Doubts are silenced with celestial charts. Fear becomes excitement. Longing becomes obsession. The relationship is never about truth. It's about control through illusion. The manipulator doesn't win love. They construct it brick by brick, star by star, until their target cannot tell the difference between true feeling and forced fate. In the end, the stars never chose. Someone else did, and they were never in love. They were convinced they were, by the cold machinery of a false cosmic romance. Sacred geography lies are a manipulative tactic that redefines spiritual reality by claiming ownership over land said to be touched by gods, miracles, or divine origin. In ancient civilizations, geography wasn't just physical, it was metaphysical. Certain rivers healed, certain mountains spoke, certain valleys were the resting places of heroes or the birthplaces of gods. And whoever claimed those lands didn't just gain property, they gained power over belief. A ruler might declare, "This hill is where the god of war stood." A priesthood might insist, "This cave holds the breath of creation." Whether true or not didn't matter. Once the declaration was made, accompanied by rituals, inscriptions, and carefully planted relics, pilgrims came, offerings poured in, and political control wrapped itself in spiritual legitimacy. This tactic exploited the emotional hunger for connection to the divine. People want to stand where God stood. They want to touch the dust of miracles. And so, they came in droves, bowed in reverence, paid in silver and livestock, never realizing the sacred site was manufactured to serve an agenda. Sometimes it was a political border being justified. Sometimes it was a rival being displaced under the claim of spiritual contamination. Sometimes it was simply to drain wealth and loyalty into a temple built on lies. Over time, the fabricated holy place became real, not because it ever held divine presence, but because belief made it so. And once belief crystallizes in stone, it cannot be undone. The manipulator wins not just land, but the hearts tethered to it. They redraw maps not with ink, but with faith. And faith, once misled, will defend a lie to the death. Poetic confusion. Poetic confusion is a manipulation tactic that cloaks power in beauty, using cryptic, symbolic, or deliberately ambiguous verse to shape law, avoid blame, and guide decisions without ever being held accountable. In ancient cultures where poets were prophets and rhythm was seen as sacred truth, a cleverly spoken line of verse could hold more sway than a written law. But when that verse was crafted, not to enlighten, but to mislead, it became a weapon disguised as wisdom. A ruler might consult a royal poet before making a controversial judgment. The poet delivers a line like, "The serpent that sleeps beneath stone waits not for justice, but hunger." What does it mean? A threat? A prophecy? A warning to act or a call to wait? No one knows. And that's the point. Its meaning can shift. If the decision goes wrong, the manipulator claims misinterpretation. If it succeeds, they take credit. They shape the outcome, but never leave fingerprints. This tactic thrives on ambiguity. Laws written or spoken in verse are harder to challenge. They sound holy, elevated, untouchable. Even when the meaning is unclear, people nod as if they understand. afraid to appear foolish or sacrilegious. The manipulator uses that silence to guide courts, kings, and councils with invisible reins. Emotionally, poetic confusion disarms the rational mind. It creates the illusion of depth, of divine meaning just out of reach. It turns simple decisions into riddles, so only the chosen, those who understand, can lead. But there is no meaning behind the curtain, just carefully crafted confusion controlling the world one beautiful, hollow line at a time. Mystic disappearance. Mystic disappearance is a manipulation tactic soaked in drama, fear, and awe, a deliberate vanishing act designed to elevate a mortal into myth. In the ancient world, where gods walked among men and miracles shaped the fabric of belief, disappearing without a trace wasn't cowardice, it was divine. Prophets, kings, sorcerers, and holy figures would sometimes vanish from their chambers, from battlefields, from prison cells, only to be remembered as chosen, ascended, or eternal. But behind the miracle was often a carefully orchestrated illusion, a secret tunnel beneath a temple, a loyal servant staging a death, a burned robe left behind in the ashes. The manipulator would disappear in a flash of fear and wonder, while whispers spread like wildfire. The gods have taken him. He became light. He walked into the sky. People wept, prayed, followed the signs. The absence became more powerful than the presence ever was. And that's the cruel brilliance of it. When someone disappears mysteriously, the human mind fills the void with divinity. No one imagines cowardice or manipulation. They imagine holiness, greatness, immortality. The vanishing figure becomes legend, unquestioned, unreachable. They can't be challenged because they're no longer here, but their image lingers like a ghost that still rules from the shadows. Emotionally, mystic disappearance is devastating. It hijacks grief and turns it into worship. It steals reality and replaces it with myth. People build temples to the vanished, die in their name, carry out their will, never realizing it was all an exit strategy wrapped in divine theater. The manipulator doesn't flee, they ascend, and from that moment on, their silence becomes sacred. Hero tomb fabrication. Hero tomb fabrication is a manipulation tactic that forges legends into stone. Literally, it involves inventing, building, or discovering the burial site of a long-dead hero, then using it to stir national pride, justify conquest, or sanctify political rule. In ancient times, where history blurred with myth and grave sites were places of worship and power, this tactic was devastatingly effective. A pile of bones, a chiseled name, and a shrine, and suddenly the land had a destiny, and its rulers had divine backing. A kingdom on the verge of collapse might announce the miraculous discovery of a tomb. Here lies the body of the founder, blessed by the gods. The timing was never coincidental. Priests staged the find, rulers funded the monument, poets wrote verses tying the hero's courage to the current regime. The people flocked, they lit candles, left offerings, wept. They believed, because to question the tomb was to question your own identity, your own roots. The tomb became more than a grave. It became a myth made tangible, a holy anchor in uncertain times. It justified war. We fight to protect his legacy. It justified rule. His blood flows in our veins. It even justified oppression. He died for this land. You owe him loyalty. But behind the marble and incense lay nothing more than a clever lie. Anonymous remains, relics planted in dust, and a name carved in hope, not truth. This tactic doesn't just manipulate memory. It manufactures it. It reshapes the past to control the present, turning stone into scripture and bones into chains. And once people bow before a grave that never belonged to a hero, they'll kneel before anyone who claims to protect it. Mass ritual hallucinations. Mass ritual hallucinations are among the most haunting manipulation tactics ever conceived. Using mind-altering substances in sacred ceremonies to fabricate divine experiences and cement absolute control. In ancient temples, hidden groves, and shadowy catacombs, leaders would invite the faithful into rituals of transformation, where smoke filled the air, strange music echoed, and sacred drinks were passed around. What the people didn't know was that these moments of spiritual awakening were chemically engineered illusions. The participants would begin to sway, tremble, weep. They'd see lights, gods, ancestors, omens, visions so vivid they felt more real than reality. And when they awoke hours later, disoriented and overwhelmed, they were told exactly what it all meant. You saw the divine. You were chosen. You now belong. The manipulator didn't need to convince them. They felt it. The hallucination became memory, and memory became unbreakable faith. This tactic was terrifyingly effective because it bypassed thought entirely. People didn't reason their way into belief. They experienced it in their bodies, their bones, their blood. It was emotional hijacking disguised as enlightenment. And those who resisted, they were just not ready, not pure, not worthy. The pressure to conform was enormous because no one wanted to be the only one who didn't see the light. Over time, these visions became scripture. The divine messages spoken mid-delirium were written down as sacred truth, and the ones behind it all, the priests, the rulers, the orchestrators, held power not by rule of law, but by rule of reality itself. They turned the human mind into a temple and built their throne deep inside it. Divine plague blaming. Divine plague blaming is a vicious manipulation tactic that turns sickness into a weapon of social control by framing enemies, minorities, or political threats as the cause of an epidemic and declaring the plague a punishment from the gods for their existence. In ancient times, when disease wasn't understood scientifically but spiritually, every fever was a curse, every death a divine judgment, and fear of divine wrath was stronger than any army. Manipulators seized this terror. When illness swept through a city, they pointed to a scapegoat. The gods are angry because of them. Maybe it was a foreign merchant, a political rival, a religious sect, or a tribe on the edge of power. They didn't need evidence. They just needed fear and a crowd desperate for answers. Sacrifices were demanded, expulsions ordered, entire groups hunted, exiled, or killed, all while the real cause of the disease went ignored. This tactic wasn't just about purging enemies. It was about unifying the frightened under a common hatred. Leaders framed themselves as the saviors, the only ones who could appease the gods and restore order. And the people, already grieving, already desperate, followed blindly, because fear needs a face and hatred needs a name. Emotionally, divine plague blaming is catastrophic. It turns grief into violence, pain into persecution. It doesn't heal, it bleeds. It teaches societies to destroy their weakest in moments of vulnerability. And behind it all stands the manipulator, untouched, exalted, watching disease kill, and lies spread faster than any contagion, all while securing power through the cruelest of scapegoats, human suffering. Mock afterlife trials. Mock afterlife trials are a psychological manipulation tactic designed to paralyze people with fear, not of death, but of what comes after. In ancient civilizations where the afterlife was believed to be a place of judgment, reward, or eternal torment, the concept of a soul standing trial before gods held immense, soul-shaking power. Manipulators took this belief and twisted it into terrifying theater, publicly staging fake trials of the dead to control the living. In temple courtyards or sacred groves, priests would perform rituals claiming to judge a soul that had just departed. A corpse might be laid out ceremonially, its spirit summoned with chants and incense. Witnesses would gather trembling as priests declared visions or messages from the underworld. The soul is suffering for his greed. He spoke against the gods and now burns in darkness.
He defied the king, and the spirits dragged him into shadow. No proof, no appeal, just a terrifying glimpse into a fate waiting for anyone who disobeyed. These mock trials were never about the dead. They were about the audience, the family, the neighbors, the city. The message was clear. We see beyond the veil, and we hold the scale. People walked away stunned, silent, changed. A disobedient man becomes a lesson. A minor critic becomes a cursed example. Morality wasn't taught. It was burned into their imagination. Emotionally, this tactic was devastating. It turned grief into fear, sorrow into submission. People didn't just obey the law, they obeyed the invisible. And the manipulators, they crafted eternal punishment with smoke, symbols, and words. And the people believed it, because no one dares challenge a courtroom that reaches beyond the grave. Eternal edict carvings. Eternal edict carvings are a manipulation tactic etched in stone. Literally, they involve inscribing laws, declarations, or divine decrees onto monuments, obelisks, and temple walls, not to record truth, but to manufacture it. In ancient civilizations, where stone was sacred and the written word was believed to come from the gods themselves, to carve something in stone was to declare it eternal, unquestionable, and divinely sanctioned. Rulers, high priests, and dynasties used this tactic to fabricate permanence. A king might commission a massive inscription claiming, "I was chosen by the gods since the dawn of time," or "the stars blessed my conquest." Laws never passed were etched as ancient tradition. Victories never won were immortalized in marble reliefs. Time itself was manipulated. What was written became what had always been. This worked because stone gave the illusion of age. Even newly inscribed walls looked ancient after a season of sun and dust. And most people couldn't read anyway. They saw the grandeur of the carvings, the sacred setting, the ritual surrounding them, and believed. Priests repeated the words, poets sang them. Generations were raised under the weight of laws that never existed until one ruler decided they should. Emotionally, this tactic is devastating. It creates a false history that cannot be argued with. You don't debate stone, you don't erase it. It stares down at you from temple walls, whispering a narrative crafted to control your mind, your choices, your loyalty. The greatest lie wasn't shouted, it was carved, cold, permanent, and no one knew it was a lie at all. Symbolic starvation. Symbolic starvation is a manipulative tactic that weaponizes suffering, turning hunger into a spectacle of guilt, pressure, and psychological domination. In ancient times, where fasting was seen as sacred devotion, purification, or protest, choosing to publicly starve oneself wasn't just self-denial. It was emotional blackmail wrapped in holiness. And in the hands of manipulators, it became a blade not pointed outward, but inward, cutting straight into the conscience of those watching. A priest, ruler, or revered elder might declare a fast for the sins of the people, or to cleanse the land of rebellion. They would sit before temples wrapped in rags, pale and trembling, refusing food with dramatic proclamations of sorrow. The crowd would gather, whispers would spread, "He is dying for us. We have angered the gods. We must make it right." The manipulator would eat nothing, say little, let their wasting body speak louder than any decree. And it worked. Guilt flooded communities like a tide. Enemies relented. Dissidents returned in shame. The people, desperate to end the suffering they had been tricked into believing they caused, offered loyalty, tribute, silence, not because they were convinced, but because they were ashamed. And shame is obedience's oldest fuel. What makes this tactic so devastating is that it reverses the power dynamic. The manipulator plays the victim, but pulls every string. They suffer just enough to make others feel monstrous for resisting. And when the fast ends and the sacrifice is complete, they rise not as martyrs, but as untouchable saints. Because nothing silences opposition
faster than the sight of someone willing to die, not for power, but under the mask of piety. Controlled miracle timing. Controlled miracle timing is a masterful manipulation tactic that creates the illusion of divine intervention by carefully staging events to unfold at the precise moment when faith teeters on the edge of collapse. In ancient worlds obsessed with omens, signs, and miracles, belief was fragile, easily broken by suffering, but also easily reignited by wonder. Manipulators knew this. They learned to choreograph events, signs, and wonders to appear not as coincidence, but as confirmation of divine presence. A drought ends just after a high priest calls for a ritual rain dance because water was already on its way. A prisoner is pardoned after pleading to the gods because the ruler had planned it in advance. A hidden flame is set to ignite during a public prayer. A sick person rises, healed, before a cheering crowd. The people erupt in praise, weep in awe, fall to their knees. They don't see strategy, they see a miracle. This tactic exploits timing, psychology, and a desperate human need for hope. It works because people want to believe. They want to feel the gods are listening, that their suffering has meaning. The manipulator gives them that, right on schedule, and in doing so becomes the gatekeeper of faith itself. Emotionally, controlled miracle timing is deeply cruel. It offers comfort and awe, but at the cost of truth. It binds hearts to a lie dressed in light. And once people have seen a miracle, they stop asking questions. They obey, they worship, not because they were deceived, but because they begged to be. Name erasure ritual. Name erasure ritual is a devastating form of ancient psychological warfare, an act not of killing the body, but of annihilating the identity. In cultures where one's name was believed to hold spiritual weight, link the soul to the afterlife, and secure a place in memory, removing that name was the ultimate punishment. It was social death, eternal exile, a vanishing so complete it felt worse than execution, and manipulators wielded it like a god's hammer. When a ruler or priest wanted to destroy someone without bloodshed, they ordered their names scraped off temple walls, chiseled out of victory stones, erased from tombs and public records. The act wasn't just symbolic, it was surgical. The name was cut out, sometimes with curses etched in its place. Statues were defaced, inscriptions defiled, coins melted, and the message to the people was terrifyingly clear. This person no longer exists, and neither will you if you forget your place. Emotionally, the impact was brutal. Families were shamed, history became distorted, the erased were denied not just memory, but legacy, afterlife, meaning. It wasn't just a punishment, it was a ritualized obliteration of identity, a warning etched into stone and fear. Loyalty is survival, and forgetting is obedience. The manipulator didn't need to shout. The silence where a name once stood did all the talking, and in that silence, generations learned to worship selectively, speak carefully, and never challenge the hand that held the chisel. Because in a world where names lived forever, the greatest terror was to be made unremembered. Public demon placation. Public demon placation is a chillingly effective manipulation tactic that disguises failure, corruption, or cruelty as spiritual misfortune, blaming the faults of leaders not on their choices, but on the influence of dark, invisible forces. In ancient societies where evil spirits were feared, where possession was a divine explanation for madness, sickness, or chaos, this tactic allowed rulers to maintain power without accountability. The enemy wasn't the king, it was the demon inside him. When a ruler made a disastrous decision, plunged a city into war, raised unjust taxes, or allowed famine to spread, advisors or priests would declare, "He has been afflicted. A dark spirit clings to his soul." The people, terrified of angering the divine, were told the fault lay not in the man, but in a malevolent force beyond his control. And the solution?
not rebellion, not judgment, but ritual, mercy, obedience, prayers. The manipulator staged dramatic rituals to cleanse the ruler, sacrifices, chants, bloodletting, incense flooding the temples. The king, pale and trembling, might play the part of the possessed, weeping or convulsing before being restored. And the people, they rejoiced, not because justice had been served, but because the illusion of control had been restored. Fear became gratitude. Anger dissolved into relief. Emotionally, this tactic is devastating. It teaches a population to forgive the unforgivable, to excuse abuse as spiritual attack, to see power not as flawed, but as cursed. And so, the cycle continues. The ruler remains untouchable. The people remain loyal. And evil, real and human, is hidden behind masks of smoke and ritual. Never punish, only exercise. Double agents in temples. Double agents in temples is a manipulation tactic that corrupts the sacred from within, embedding loyal informants inside religious sanctuaries disguised as priests, seers, or temple servants to extract secrets, influence confessions, and funnel critical information straight to the throne. In the ancient world, temples were more than places of worship. They were the emotional core of society, where people confessed fears, admitted sins, prayed for forbidden hopes, and spoke freely, believing they were safe under the eyes of the gods. But what they didn't know was that the gods were listening through men. Rulers and power-hungry elites placed their most cunning agents behind altars. These weren't true priests, they were spies in robes. They sat in ceremonies, offered blessings, and listened, carefully, silently. They memorized names, heard rumors whispered through prayer, learned who doubted the regime, who loved whom, who plotted in fear, and every night the secrets of the sacred were passed not to heaven, but to the crown. This tactic weaponized trust at its most vulnerable. People didn't censor themselves in temples. They poured their hearts out, and once their words were harvested, they could be used against them. Arrests came in the night, rivals were silenced, families were destroyed, and no one understood how the ruler always seemed to know everything. Emotionally, this tactic is devastating. It turns holiness into surveillance. Faith becomes betrayal. It poisons the very space meant to heal and protect until no one knows where to turn, who to trust, or whether their prayers are being answered or recorded. And all the while, the manipulator watches from a distance, wearing a crown built not on faith, but on stolen souls. Prophecy, vague speak is a manipulation tactic cloaked in mystery, fear, and reverence, delivering predictions so ambiguous, so open-ended that no matter what happens, the speaker appears wise, divine, or terrifyingly accurate. In the ancient world, where oracles were revered and prophecy shaped empires, vague predictions were the ultimate tool of control. They created the illusion of foresight, while cleverly dodging the risk of being wrong. A prophet might declare, "The serpent shall rise when the sun hides its face." What does it mean? War? An eclipse? Betrayal? It doesn't matter. The power lies in the uncertainty. If disaster strikes, the prophecy is fulfilled. If nothing happens, the time has not yet come. The language is elastic, symbolic, poetic, evasive, and deliberately so. Vague prophecies can bend to any outcome, and the interpreter always looks right in the end. This tactic works because the human brain craves meaning. People need to make sense of chaos. So when events unfold, they retroactively shape them to fit the prophecy. Suffering becomes fated. Triumph becomes foretold. Skeptics stay silent, drowned out by fear and awe. And the manipulator? They never have to explain themselves. They only need to smile, nod, and let belief do the rest. Emotionally, prophecy, vague speak, is a psychological snare. It wraps uncertainty in sacred language, silences dissent with mysticism, and makes the speaker untouchable. The prophecy is never tested, only fulfilled by interpretation, and the people, desperate for signs, willingly hand over their reason for a lie that sounds like destiny, because nothing enslaves the mind quite like a prediction that cannot be wrong. Selective divine punishment. Selective divine punishment is a ruthless manipulation tactic that turns suffering into proof of guilt, claiming that misfortune, disease, or death strikes only those who have angered the gods, and conveniently, those victims are always the manipulator's enemies. In ancient societies where divine wrath was feared more than the blade, this tactic became a psychological guillotine. You didn't need evidence. You didn't need a trial. You only needed a storm, a failed harvest, or a plague, and a name to blame. When a rival fell ill, it wasn't illness. It was judgment. When a dissenting city was struck by flood or fire, it wasn't chance. It was divine punishment. Priests and rulers would proclaim, "The gods have spoken. These are the cursed." And suddenly, dissenters weren't just wrong. They were unholy. Enemies weren't just political. They were sinners. And everyone else, terrified of joining them, stayed quiet. The brilliance of this tactic lies in its simplicity. You don't have to punish your enemies directly. Fate does it for you, or so the people are led to believe. And if fate needs a little help, a poisoned well, a set fire, a rigged oracle, then the illusion becomes complete. The gods appear to be on your side, and everyone else fears becoming the next example. Emotionally, this tactic is devastating. It turns faith into a tool of terror. It isolates victims who are not only suffering, but publicly shamed as divine targets. And it elevates the manipulator into godlike status, protected, chosen, unpunishable. Because if harm only touches your enemies, then clearly you must be blessed. Echo chamber poets. Echo chamber poets are not artists. They're instruments of manipulation. This tactic involves hiring bards, scribes, and poets to echo, exaggerate, and glorify a ruler's ideology, flooding the culture with rhythmic obedience. In ancient civilizations, where poetry was scripture, entertainment, and public record all at once, words carried power beyond mere politics. They shaped how people felt, remembered, and believed. And when every lyric, every verse, every performance sang the same message, resistance died, not from violence, but from exhaustion. These poets didn't just flatter. They created entire mythologies around rulers. A tyrant didn't crush rebellion. He restored divine balance. A tax wasn't oppression. It was a sacred offering to ensure the land's prosperity. Every war was holy. Every decree was just. And the people hearing it in marketplaces, temples, and feasts began to believe. Because when every voice around you repeats the same story, it stops sounding like propaganda. It starts sounding like truth. This tactic works because poetry bypasses logic and lodges itself in emotion. It's hard to remember laws, but easy to remember a rhyme, a song, a chant, a tale told by firelight. The manipulator floods the public with these verses, making dissent feel isolated, even sinful. Those who think differently feel alone, outnumbered, wrong. Emotionally, echo chamber poets suffocate the soul. They silence opposition without needing to punish it. They turn language into a cage lined with velvet. And once the people begin to repeat those same verses themselves, singing their own submission, they don't even realize they're no longer free. They think they're faithful. They think they're patriotic. But really, they're just echoing the words someone else paid to write. Reverse curse rituals. Reverse curse rituals are a darkly theatrical manipulation tactic designed to terrify enemies and elevate the manipulator to near mythic status by making it appear that any attack or ill will directed toward them doesn't just fail, but backfires mystically. In the ancient world, where curses, spells, and divine retribution were woven into the fabric of everyday life,
Few things were more terrifying than the idea that harming someone might bring disaster upon yourself. The manipulator begins by claiming sacred protection, declaring themselves blessed by a god, shielded by ancestral spirits, or bound by an ancient ritual that returns evil to the sender. Then, when a rival falls ill, when an attacker dies mysteriously, or when a rebellion collapses unexpectedly, the manipulator seizes the moment. They tried to curse me. The curse returned to them. Even if it was coincidence or even sabotage, the narrative spreads like wildfire. People begin to whisper, "You can't touch them. The gods protect them. The land itself defends them." Fear sets in. No one dares plot. No one dares speak ill, not out of respect, but out of terror that merely thinking harm might summon it back tenfold. To solidify the illusion, the manipulator performs ritual displays, smoke-filled ceremonies, symbolic mirrors, inverted offerings, chants spoken backward. These aren't for the gods, they're for the audience. It's performance magic designed to burn the idea of supernatural retaliation into the public mind. Emotionally, it's paralyzing. The people don't just believe the manipulator is invincible, they believe they are untouchable. And in a world where thoughts can kill and curses boomerang, that illusion becomes a prison of fear no sword can break. Public dream interpretation. Public dream interpretation is a manipulation tactic that hijacks the subconscious, weaponizing the private, intimate realm of dreams to steer entire populations toward desired behavior. In ancient civilizations, dreams were not just personal, they were portals to the divine, messages from gods, ancestors, or spirits. To dream was sacred. To dream publicly was dangerous, and those who claimed the power to interpret dreams held terrifying influence over hearts, minds, and fate. A ruler might declare, "Last night I dreamed of a lion devouring the sun." The royal seer stepped forward. "This means our enemies will fall before us. The gods bless our war." Or a priest might announce that the people's nightmares of floods and famine are divine warnings, punishment for disobedience or failure to worship. These interpretations are never neutral. They are not curious explorations of the soul. They are narratives shaped and sharpened to steer the masses. This tactic works because it preys on vulnerability. People believe their dreams mean something, and when a powerful figure says your dream foretells something great or terrible, it feels real. Interpreters don't just decode the dream, they give it emotional weight, political consequence. A woman dreaming of fire becomes a harbinger of rebellion. A child dreaming of light becomes a symbol of divine favor. Real or not, the story takes hold. Emotionally, it's devastating. Private fears become public tools. Hope becomes harnessed. Doubt becomes outlawed. People start to watch their own minds, terrified that the wrong dream might betray them. And the manipulators? They don't need armies. They just need you to close your eyes and hand them the meaning when you wake. Heavenly signs, forgery. Heavenly signs, forgery is a masterstroke of manipulation, faking celestial alignments, omens, or astronomical events to create the illusion of divine approval, impending doom, or sacred timing. In ancient societies where the stars were not just lights in the sky, but living messages from the gods, forging a heavenly sign meant bending fate itself to your will, and the people believed, because who dares question the sky? This tactic was executed with cold precision. Astrologers loyal to the throne might claim, "Mars and Jupiter align, our enemies will fall." A manipulated lunar calendar could place a royal coronation under an auspicious star. Fireworks might be launched at night to mimic a comet. Mirrors placed on mountaintops could reflect unnatural light at dusk. A shadow cast at the right angle during a sacred festival could be declared a divine prophecy fulfilled. It didn't have to be real. It only had to look real. And it worked. People wept with awe. Priests bowed. Generals hesitated. Even skeptics went quiet, because deep down, Everyone fears the unknown, and nothing feels more terrifying or more holy than the sky itself turning in favor of your enemy or against your cause. Emotionally, heavenly signs forgery is devastating because it hijacks belief at its highest level. The people don't just follow, they submit. The ruler becomes more than a man. He becomes the will of the heavens in flesh. Every decision feels inevitable. Every law feels sacred. And behind it all, the manipulator smiles because they didn't just control the stars, they controlled how people saw them. And perception, once distorted by wonder, is almost impossible to reclaim.